Chapter 935. Li Yundong's roar shook the sky, and in an instant the world was silent. All the cultivators of the Zhongri sect were shocked. They couldn't believe their ears. The immovable wisdom king was the incarnation of Buddha's anger. He actually said to Buddha Tathagata, "Even if you are Buddha Tathagata, even if you are the old ancestor of the three pure ones, I will kill you without mercy." Was Li Yundong crazy? That was Buddha Tathagata. His power came from the Buddha himself. Wasn't he afraid that all the gods and Buddhas would beat him back to his original state? Se Xinguang and Se Chuyun looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape. They couldn't imagine or understand Li Yundong's behavior at all. Before World War II, Japan was a very religious country. Even after World War II, the emperor was pulled down from the throne, but religion still had a deep impact on the lives of the Japanese. The power of the major cultivation sects in Japan was still passed down through the family. Cultivators like Se Xinguang and Se Chuyun were equivalent to inner disciples like Ziyuan, Ruan Hongling, and Mao Yucheng. They were destined to be cultivators from the moment they were born. Therefore, great priests and goddesses like them were deeply rooted in the service and belief of the sect. They could not imagine that one day they would shout at Amaterasu, "No matter if you are Amaterasu or Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, I will kill you without mercy." Se Xinguang opened his mouth and said in a strange voice, "Wisdom King. Is he crazy?" Se Chuyun also stared at the sky in a daze. She had been cultivating since she was a child and didn't understand any so-called love in the world at all. Therefore, she couldn't understand why Li Yundong would resolutely become enemies with all the gods and Buddhas in the world for the sake of the mystical silver fox and resolutely fall out with the Buddha. Se Chuyun's iceberg-like heart suddenly trembled. Her eyes were fixed on the burly man in the sky who was holding a delicate body in his arms. She suddenly felt that this man was even taller than the gods and Buddhas in the sky. But this thought was only for a moment. Soon, she sighed softly and said, "I'm afraid that Wisdom King is going to kill himself." Li Yundong's Dharmakaya of Wisdom King came from Buddha Tathagata, but he had now broken up with Buddha Tathagata in public. If Buddha Tathagata took back the power of Wisdom King, no matter how powerful Li Yundong was, he would definitely not be a match for all the gods and Buddhas in the sky and the old ancestors of the three pure ones. Li Yundong had definitely shocked the cultivators of Zhongri. He had shaken the hearts of Zhou Qin and Ziyuan, and had even made the gods and Buddhas of heaven furious. When Buddha Tathagata heard Li Yundong's words, he didn't move for a while. However, the four bodhisattvas, Manjushri, Samantabhadra, Ksitigarbha, and Guanyin were furious. 500 arhats and 3,000 vajras smashed the powerful magical weapons and magic in their hands at Li Yundong. Li Yundong didn't hesitate. With a backhand he protected the girl in his arms behind him. With the other hand he pinched a Mahamudra with one hand. With a roar he slapped at the magic weapons all over the sky. The power of this palm was no less than that of the Tathagata Buddha, who had slapped the mystical silver fox before. Everyone saw a huge golden palm suddenly appear in the sky. This palm stood in mid-air like a golden Buddha wall. Countless magic arts and magic treasures bombarded it, only creating waves of golden waves. It was like a clay ox sinking into the sea and there was no more movement. Li Yundong raised his palm, and a continuous stream of blue qi rose from the top of his head. This qi floated in the air and immediately turned into the image of a movable Wisdom King. His whole body was blue and black and his whole body was covered with blue flames. He had 3 heads and 6 arms. Li Yundong's true god Fazhen sat cross-legged in the air, with all 6 arms pinching his fingers. His left and right eyes were closed and he was reciting Buddhist scriptures. However, the vertical eye between his eyebrows was open, and there was an angry blue flame in it. The Fazhen of immovable Wisdom King sat upright in the air, holding 3 Mahamudra, namely the Dharma Boundary Seal, the Vajra World Samadhi Seal, and the immovable Wisdom King Fundamental Seal. These 3 Mahamudra stood in front of him, like a natural chasm. No matter how fiercely the powerful magical weapons and magic skills of the gods and Buddhas attacked, they could not break through the barrier at all. Speaking of which, although the 4 bodhisattvas, 500 arhats, and 3,000 vajras were all gods, each of them had different responsibilities and abilities, so their spiritual power was also different. Some of them existed to enlighten the world, while others existed to save all living beings. However, immovable Wisdom King was a god created by Buddha to resist demons and evil spirits. They represented the highest and strongest power in the Buddhist cultivation world. Although the 4 bodhisattvas, 500 arhats, and 3,000 vajras were also powerful, compared with immovable Wisdom King, who specialized in fighting, It was equivalent to the police in charge of the security of the community meeting the special forces that specialized in fighting in the most dangerous and difficult environment. Their strength was not on the same level at all. Li Yundong's wisdom kings Fazhen remained motionless under the siege of all the gods and Buddhas. Although the great ancestors of the three pure ones stood on the golden stair jade platform and watched indifferently, this amazing scene still shocked everyone in the cultivation world of Zhongri. They hadn't expected that Li Yundong would be so strong that he could fight against so many gods and Buddhas by himself. There were even desperate cultivators who said in a trembling voice, "Is immovable wisdom king going to turn against the devil? Has the decline of the Tao and the growth of the devil reached such a point?" At this time, many cultivators shouted loudly, "Buddha, do you want to watch the true Dharma of the world die out?" Their voices were like waves, and even the deafening explosions in the sky could not stop them. Seated high on the nine-tiered lotus throne, the Gautama Buddha was high up in the clouds. No one knew what kind of expression the Gautama Buddha would have when he saw his strongest general brazenly rebelling. All they saw was the Gautama Buddha remaining silent. But not long after, a distant Buddhist chant came from the distant horizon again. This time, everyone only heard a Buddha's voice, and four figures slowly appeared in the clouds. The leader was a man with 3 heads and 8 arms, holding various weapons in his hands, carrying flames on his back, and stepping on the Mahasvara. He was Trailokaya Vijaya, the second of the 5 wisdom kings who had conquered greed, anger, obsession, and the 3 worlds. The second figure who appeared was green all over. His eyes were red and his hair was black and red like samadhi flames. His huge eyes were as big as bells, and his body was entwined with 2-headed snakes. He held a Vajra pestle in one hand, and his other hands were full of wish prints and karma prints. The flames around him were like moons. He was sitting cross-legged on the green lotus-colored stone throne, looking majestic. He was Junchali Wisdom King who could subdue the 5 devils. Another figure was also green and black with 6 faces, 6 arms and 6 feet. He was sitting on the rustling stone throne with flames on his back. His 6 arms were holding halberds, bows, ropes, swords, arrows, sticks and other weapons. He was Mahavira Wisdom King who could subdue demons among humans. The last figure to appear was a man with 3 faces, 6 arms and 5 angry eyes. He was covered with treasures and accessories, and his body was burning with flames like tribulation fire. He was holding a Vajra pestle, a Vajra bell, a longbow, a sharp sword and other weapons. He was Mahavira Wisdom King who could subdue demons among humans. As soon as the 4 wisdom kings appeared, the pressure on Li Yundong immediately doubled. Although Li Yundong was the leader of the 5 wisdom kings under Buddha and could subdue all demons, unlike the other 4 wisdom kings who could only subdue some demons, if the other 4 wisdom kings joined forces, the outcome would be unpredictable. Everyone saw that as soon as the 4 wisdom kings appeared, the Vajra pestle in each of their hands struck at Li Yundong like thunder. At the same time they plucked the bowstrings in their hands. Every time the bowstrings buzzed, a sharp arrow of light shot out and bombarded the Mahamudra in front of Li Yundong. Although there were only 4 of them, the sound of the bowstrings being pulled was as dense as 10,000 people pulling the bowstrings at the same time. The flying arrows falling from the sky were as dense as rain, covering the sky and the sun. The power of the Vajra pestle was so strong that it even squeezed the surrounding air to distort and deform. It was as if the world would collapse with one pestle. Li Yundong saw that the 4 wisdom kings had appeared at the same time and were attacking him without saying a word. He shouted angrily, and the wisdom kings Fazhen waved the Vajra wisdom sword and the Vajra silk rope to meet the rain of arrows and the ferocious thunder like Vajra pestle. Everyone watched as the 5 wisdom monarchs fought in midair, causing the heavens to shake and the earth to tremble. Brilliant light shone everywhere, and the 5 figures in the sky would occasionally wrestle with each other. Sometimes they would fly far away from each other, and then they would use all sorts of hand seals and treasures to attack each other. They were dumbfounded and dazzled. It was as if the Battle of Susano had turned into a child's play. As the saying goes, when the immortals fight, the mortals suffer. Many cultivators couldn't withstand the power of the 5 wisdom kings fighting in midair. They covered their chests in pain and fell to the ground. The divine power of the 5 wisdom kings was too amazing. Every time their power collided, it could almost instantly suck out the surrounding air, causing the cultivators in the field to be in extreme pain. They felt as if there was a huge rock pressing on their chests. Li Yundong was fighting against 4 people. Although he was the leader of the 5 wisdom kings, it was still extremely difficult for him. He gritted his teeth tightly, his eyes widened, the corners of his eyes cracked, and the corners of his mouth oozed blood. His spiritual energy was far higher than any of the four wisdom kings, but he was fighting against the four wisdom kings alone. It was difficult for him to fight against them with two fists. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan watched the earth-shattering battle from afar. They were so nervous that their palms were full of sweat. They stared with their eyes wide open and didn't dare to say a word. They didn't even dare to breathe too loudly, for fear that they would disturb Li Yundong and distract him. But at this moment, the mystical silver fox behind Li Yundong came to her senses. Although she had been seriously injured before, her mind was still clear. She knew that Li Yundong had become enemies with all the gods and Buddhas for Su Chan, and had even resolutely broken up with Buddha Tathagata. The mystical silver fox looked at Li Yundong in shock. She couldn't believe that there was really a man in the world who was willing to give up everything for the woman he loved. The mystical silver fox stared at Li Yundong, who was fighting alone. She suddenly said in a daze, "Li Yundong, do you really want to save Su Chan so much?" This sentence immediately hit Li Yundong's softest point. His body trembled violently, and the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King sitting high in the clouds shook violently. In an instant, the golden body shattered. The countless sharp arrows and vajra of the four great Wisdom Kings suddenly shattered the Dharmakaya of Immovable Wisdom King. Li Yundong roared and fell from the sky. Chapter 936. Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Dharmakaya was instantly smashed into countless pieces from the air, and he himself was also knocked down from the air. The simultaneous attack of the four Wisdom Kings was too fierce, so Li Yundong was immediately seriously injured when he was slightly distracted. However, the Immovable Wisdom King was the leader of the five Wisdom Kings after all. Although his Dharmakaya had been defeated, the bow, arrow and vajra above Li Yundong's head were like a storm. In the next second, the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King Zhong immediately gathered again, turning into a mighty and fierce vajra posture that could not be moved by the wind. His 6 arms once again pinched out a Mahamudra, like an immovable mountain, blocking the overwhelming attack in front of Li Yundong. In the distance, everyone could only see a sea of blazing blue fire. Arrows fell like rain, and the arrows were like flying locusts. The sky was almost covered by the rain of arrows. Even the gods and Buddhas could not see their figures. They could only vaguely make out the four Wisdom Kings with many faces and arms quickly plucking the bowstrings. Every time they plucked the bowstring, a golden arrow of light would shoot out from the empty bowstring. However, as soon as the arrow of light flew out, it would split into 2, then 4, and by the time it flew into the air, it was already a golden rain of arrows. All the deities and Buddhas knew that the Immovable Wisdom King was the king of all Wisdom Kings. He could destroy all demons and devils, he could destroy all obstacles. His strength was so great that it could shake the heavens and the earth. If he were to fight one-on-one with the other Wisdom Kings, the Immovable Wisdom King could defeat them effortlessly. Therefore, the four Wisdom Kings joined forces to attack Li Yundong. On the one hand, they used the rain of arrows like continuous spider silk to stick Li Yundong in place, making him unable to exert his amazing power. On the other hand, the real trump card was the Vajra scepter and the Vajra sword in the hands of the four Wisdom Kings. These Vajra pestle were extremely powerful. Often, a mountain could be smashed into powder with one pestle. Every time the golden wall of the Mahamudra made by Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Fazhen was smashed, it would tremble violently and countless cracks would appear on it in an instant. Then, the Vajra sword that was slashing down represented the power of Buddhism to destroy all demons and evil spirits. Every time the sword fell, it would cut into these cracks. Like a mountain-splitting axe, it chiseled the golden wall in front of Li Yundong little by little. Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao, who were in the stone chamber, also looked at the sky in a daze. Their eyes reflected the blue flame. In the flame, Akalanatha was sitting in the air, surrounded by a rain of swords as if he was in hell. At this moment their minds were completely blank. There was only one thought lingering in their minds. Was the invincible Li Yundong going to fall just like that? Zhou Qin and Ziyuan watched as the golden city wall formed by countless big handprints was gradually smashed by the Vajra pestle and cut into pieces by the Vajra sword. They were even more frightened, like ants on a hot pan. They wanted to help, but they didn't know where to start. As the saying went, when deities fought, mortals suffered. Even though they were lightning tribulation experts, they were still insignificant mortals before the five Wisdom Kings. They couldn't even get close to them, let alone help them. The raging blue hellfire around Li Yundong would burn them to ashes. What should we do? What should we do? Zhou Qin was so anxious that her beautiful face turned pale. She bit the corner of her mouth so hard that blood dripped from it. Ziyuan also fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. She clenched her fists and her body trembled slightly. The fairy, who was usually calm and composed, had completely lost her calm appearance. Her eyes were filled with pain and struggle, confusion and anxiety. Li Yundong only felt that he could not see anything under the pressure of the storm of arrows. Although he could feel that his strength was still strong, he was concerned about what the mystical silver fox had said to him before. Li Yundong managed to free up part of his strength. He turned his head and said to the mystical silver fox, "Mystical silver fox, what do you mean by what you just said? Are you willing to return Suchan to me?" The mystical silver fox fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. Her eyes were incomparably complicated as she said slowly, "Wisdom King, if you can agree to my conditions, I will return Suchan's soul and body to you." Li Yundong was ecstatic. "What conditions?" The mystical silver fox pointed to the gods and Buddhas all over the sky and sneered, "Kill all these hypocritical gods and Buddhas." Li Yundong's whole body shook, and his ecstatic face gradually froze. His eyes hesitated and struggled. He looked at the extremely familiar and beautiful face in front of him, and images involuntarily appeared in his mind one after another. He vaguely remembered that when he and the little girl knew each other and fell in love, the little girl had once snuggled up to him and said, "When you are rich and powerful in the future, will you dislike me?" What did he say at that time? "Ah, yes," he had asked with a smile, "if there is a rich and handsome man in front of you in the future, will you leave me?" Along the way the two of them had experienced countless hardships and tests. Li Yundong clearly remembered that in the taxi, the little girl had held the piggy bank tightly, for fear of losing even a little money in it. It was as if she lost the money she would lose herself. But when he really needed money, the little lass didn't hesitate to take out all her savings. The piggy bank that she treated like a treasure was also smashed by her without hesitation. She took out the insignificant amount of savings and handed it to him, just so that he wouldn't despise her, look down on her, and don't leave her. These images echoed in Li Yundong's mind. The familiar face in front of him gradually merged with the image of the little girl in his heart. A trace of tenderness gradually appeared on his face. He recalled his promise to the little girl, "No matter what you become, I will not dislike you and I will not leave you." The little girl had accompanied him all the way. She had fulfilled her promise. Now it was time for him to fulfill his promise. Li Yundong's eyes were infatuated and unreal. At this time, the figure of the mystical silver fox was no longer in his eyes. There was only the figure of the little girl standing in front of him like a dream. He murmured as if he was talking in a dream, "Yes. I won't dislike you. You didn't leave me at that time. How could I abandon you at this time? I will wait for you to come back. Chaner, wait for me. It'll be fine in a moment, it'll be fine in a moment." As Li Yundong spoke, his internal organs began to run wildly. The aura in his body rose unprecedentedly, and his qi and blood began to burn like flames. Everyone saw that Li Yundong's body was also boiling with blazing blue flames. His hands slowly began to make a seal. It was the most powerful and longest seal of the mantra Mahamudra, the Amitabha Buddha seal. Li Yundong made a hand seal and recited the mantra. Every time a mantra came out of his mouth, his Wisdom King's Fazhen became stronger and thicker. The golden Buddha wall in front of him, which had been on the verge of collapse, also became thicker and taller, towering like a golden mountain. The four Wisdom Kings who had been suppressing Li Yundong and attacking fiercely, became more and more crazy at this time. Their attacks became more and more fierce, but the blue flames around Li Yundong's body surged up like a tide. No matter how fierce the arrows in the sky were, they couldn't extinguish the blue sea of fire that was rushing up. At this time, the people of the cultivation world of China at the foot of the mountain were also stunned. Many of them were so shocked that they couldn't help but whisper, "Oh my God, does Li Yundong really want to go against the heaven?" They could all feel that Li Yundong was burning his own life as the price, pouring all his magical power and jinchi into this heaven-defying attack. The outcome of this battle, life and death, would be decided at this moment. For a moment, the world was extremely quiet, and only the sound of the mantra Mahamudra could be heard. When Li Yundong recited the last sentence, begging for pregnancy, Shah. When he said the mantra, there was a loud bang. The Amitabha Buddha seal formed by Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Dharmakaya slapped toward the sky from the bottom up. At first, the Mahamudra was only the size of a door, but as soon as it flew out, it kept growing and becoming as big as a mountain. When it flew close to the clouds, it had already covered the sky and the sun, almost covering the figures of all the gods, Buddhas, and the patriarchs of the three pure ones. The moment the Mahamudra touched the four Wisdom Kings, a burst of white light that made people blind suddenly bloomed. The world was as bright as day. Even a top expert like the mystical silver fox couldn't help but turn her head and narrow her eyes. This burst of white light was extremely blazing, like a raging wave reverberating and rolling in the air. Everyone could only hear a rumbling sound, like 100,000 thunderclaps exploding one after another, or like hundreds of millions of volcanoes erupting at the same time. Many cultivators were deafened in an instant, and their eyes were temporarily blinded by the piercing light. Some of them were even knocked to the ground, curling up into a ball, trembling and unconscious. After an unknown period of time, when the burst of white light passed, some cultivators with high cultivation dared to turn their faces and open their eyes in horror to look at the sky. They saw that the sky was blue and clear. The golden-stepped jade platform, the patriarchs of the three pure ones, the auspicious clouds, the lotus flowers, and the gods and Buddhas had all disappeared. It was as if they had been flowers in a mirror and the moon in the water from beginning to end. Li Yundong's palm had shattered all these flowers in a mirror and the moon in the water. Only Li Yundong was alone in the air. His wisdom king's Fazhen slowly scattered, and the blue hellfire disappeared little by little. His body swayed as if he would fall in the next second. The qi and blood in Li Yundong's body were tumbling. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his body suddenly fell down. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan were so shocked that they exclaimed and subconsciously wanted to go forward. But at this time, Li Yundong stopped abruptly. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, forced a smile, and said weakly, "Mystical Silver Fox, it's time for you to fulfill your promise." The mystical Silver Fox looked at Li Yundong in shock. She hadn't expected that Li Yundong's heaven-defying palm would disperse all the gods and Buddhas in the sky. Even the patriarchs of the three pure ones, the four wisdom kings, the four great bodhisattvas, the 500 arhats, and the 3,000 vajras were not willing to face this heaven-defying blow. Although she knew that Li Yundong was so weak that she could poke him down with one finger, as the saying goes, a tiger will not fall down. At this time, in the eyes of the mystical Silver Fox, Li Yundong was unprecedentedly powerful and lofty. She looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, "I can fulfill my promise, but before that, I want to know one thing." Li Yundong took a deep breath and said tiredly, "What is it?" Chapter 937. An unprecedented battle seemed to have come to an end. At this time, the cultivators of all sects in China opened their eyes wide in fear and panic. They looked at Li Yundong and the mystical Silver Fox in the air at a loss. At this time, their fate was in the hands of these two people. At this time, the mystical Silver Fox fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. She glanced at the desperate cultivators of all sects in China at the foot of the mountain, and suddenly a very cold smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She said, "If you can kill all these people, I will return Su Chan's soul and body to you." Li Yundong's whole body shook. His fists, which had almost collapsed, clenched again in an instant. He couldn't help looking down and saw a sea of corpses and blood at the foot of the mountain. Many cultivators had fallen in a pool of blood. Although most of the familiar faces such as Du Fei and Wei Qing were still there, their eyes were empty at this time like dead people. Almost all the masters and seedlings in the Chinese cultivation world were gathered here at this time. If they were all dead, the Chinese cultivation world would only exist in name. Then Li Yundong would be the historical sinner of the Chinese nation and the Chinese cultivation world, and he would always be nailed to the pillar of shame. Although Li Yundong could give everything for Su Chan, he still had reason. How could he be so crazy as to kill all these people in order to agree to the conditions of the mystical Silver Fox? Li Yundong fixed his eyes on the mystical Silver Fox. He suddenly smiled, and his smile was almost desperate. He said in a hoarse voice, "What the girl used to expect most was that I would become a hero that everyone looked up to. She had always firmly believed that I would become a hero. At that time, even I didn't believe that I would become the person she expected. Even now, I don't know if I will become a hero in the future, but the only thing I know is that if I become a heinous devil, my Chaner will definitely be very sad." Li Yundong continued, "When I was angry, I attracted the thunder to kill young Master He. I once asked my Chaner, 'Why didn't you stop me?' My Chaner said, 'She knows that if she stops me, I will definitely be unhappy. She doesn't want to see me live a sad life in the future. If she attracts a heavenly tribulation because of this, then she can die with me. It's not a big deal." Li Yundong's eyes moved to the cultivators of various sects at the foot of the mountain, and the expression on his face gradually became gentle. "Little girl doesn't want me to live the rest of my life with resentment, and I don't want my Chaner to feel sad in the future. So, even if you can fulfill your promise, I don't want Chaner to bear the blame because of my mistakes and not smile all day in the future." When the mystical silver fox heard Li Yundong's words, she showed a sarcastic look on her face. She couldn't help sneering loudly and said, "Hypocritical, hypocritical. All lies. You men are selfish. You wouldn't dare to give up everything for her. You've been lying to her from the beginning." The mystical silver fox remembered that thousands of years ago, the reincarnated Wisdom King had deceived her feelings, framed her, and betrayed her. She couldn't help but be angry. If you really care about her and love her so much, do you dare to die for her? Do you dare to exchange a life for a life? If you dare to do this, I will believe what you said and I will give Suchan back to you. At this time, there was another rumbling explosion in the sky. The clouds in the sky rolled again and golden light shone in all directions. The figures of gods and Buddhas could be seen slowly appearing in the clouds one by one. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to notice it at this time. The words of the mystical silver fox made his body tremble slightly. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan were so shocked that their faces turned pale at the same time. They shouted in unison, "Don't!" Zhou Qin moved and rushed toward Li Yundong. "Master, don't listen to her." However, Li Yundong raised his palm, and an invisible force abruptly fixed Zhou Qin's body in the air. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't move at all. At this time, Li Yundong turned his face and looked at Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan with some regret and shame. Then he looked at Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao apologetically, as well as Ding Nan, who had been standing aside like a wooden chicken. Li Yundong reluctantly withdrew his gaze from them. He said slowly, "I'll pay back what I owe you in this life and my next life. In this life I have to pay other people's debts first. I'm sorry." Boom. As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, the clouds in the sky split open and countless golden lights shone on the ground. The golden-stepped jade platform, the old ancestors of the three pure ones, the auspicious clouds, the lotus flowers, and the gods and Buddhas appeared again. Li Yundong raised his head and looked at the gods and Buddhas who had appeared again after being dispelled by him. He knew that today's game would not end until he died. He looked at the mystical silver fox with despair and sadness in his eyes and said, "Mystical silver fox, you must remember what you said and keep your promise. If you go back on your word, please escape from here. You must treat my Chaner well. She is greedy and likes to eat delicious food. You must give her more delicious food. Her master, you can't cook delicious food for her in the future." After that, Li Yundong used all his strength to raise his palm and hit the top of his head hard. "No!" At this moment, Zhou Qin let out an extremely shrill scream. She saw Li Yundong slap his palm on the top of her head. In an instant, countless rays of light in her body scattered in all directions. Li Yundong's Jinshin Yang spirit was smashed by himself, and in an instant, it dissipated completely and disappeared between heaven and earth. Only Li Yundong's body was slowly falling from mid-air bit by bit. Zhou Qin's eyes turned black and her body fell back. Zi Yuan appeared on the ground in an instant and caught Li Yundong. Tears kept welling up in her eyes, but she didn't seem to notice it. Her 5 fingers quickly pointed at the vital acupoints on Li Yundong's body, and she crazily injected her Jinqi into Li Yundong's body. However, when she probed with her Jinqi, she felt that Li Yundong's body was empty, as if there was nothing left. Everything seemed to have disappeared like smoke in thin air. Zi Yuan stood there in a daze. She had channeled so much spiritual power in Jinqi that she was a little shaky. At this time, Ruan Hongling hugged her while crying and said loudly, "Shiji Zi Yuan, he is dead, he is dead." Zi Yuan couldn't help but turn around and become furious. She slapped Ruan Hongling in the face. Zi Yuan said with tears streaming down her face, "He won't die, he won't die." Ruan Hongling burst into tears. She hugged Zi Yuan tightly and burst into tears. Zi Yuan seemed to have lost all her strength. She covered her mouth and sobbed. At this time, the mystical silver fox was also standing in the air in a daze. She seemed to be unable to see the gods and Buddhas above her head. She just stared at Li Yundong. The corner of her mouth couldn't help twitching, and she wanted to show a sarcastic smile. She said in a hoarse voice, "Wisdom King, we have been fighting for 1,000 years. I didn't expect you to die like this. You were actually killed by a single sentence from me. Ha 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 ha." The mystical silver fox couldn't help but raise her head and laugh wildly. "The invincible Wisdom King was killed by my words. It's ridiculous, it's ridiculous." But as she laughed loudly, she suddenly felt that her face was hot. She reached out her hand to touch it, and found that sparkling hot tears were continuously flowing down her cheeks. The mystical silver fox raised her hand in shock and looked at the tears on her fingertips, which were reflecting colorful light. She whispered in disbelief, "What am I crying for?" What am I crying for? I should laugh. He betrayed me and deceived me back then. Why can't I betray him and deceive him? I should laugh. As the mystical silver fox said these words, the tears in her eyes were like beads with a broken string, constantly dripping down. The mystical silver fox kept wiping her tears with her hands angrily. She shouted nervously, "What are you crying for? What am I crying for?" As she was shouting, suddenly, one picture after another emerged in her mind uncontrollably. On a tree-shaded path, a young man was running happily with a young girl on his back. One of them was amazing and the other was gentle. In a warm little home, a young man was fighting with a young girl for food on the table. The young girl protected the plate in front of her with her body and looked at the young man with her teeth bared, like a small animal protecting its food. In the amusement park late at night, a young girl was sitting alone on a seat, wiping her tears and choking with sobs. He doesn't want me anymore. He despises me. No one will love me in the future and no one will cook delicious food for me. These pictures emerged one after another. The mystical silver fox couldn't help but freeze in place. In her ears, the strange but very familiar pictures kept replaying in her mind. Whoever dares to touch a hair of my girl, whether you are the Jade Emperor or the Queen Mother of the West, I have one word: beat. Silly girl, no matter what you become in the future, I won't despise you because you have never despised me. Silly girl, you're already in my heart. How can I not think of you every second? I will definitely become stronger. What is love in the world? It makes people take off their clothes and pants. Do you need me to take off my clothes and pants? You are a pig, you are a pig. Even if all the gods and Buddhas oppose me, I will not leave you. You little demon, will you leave your master? Mystical silver fox, you must keep your promise. If you don't keep your promise, please escape from here. You must treat my Chaner well. She is greedy and likes to eat delicious food. The mystical silver fox was shocked and infected by the countless bits and pieces between Li Jiandong and the little fox. She wiped her tears and cried because of the pictures in her mind. When the last picture dissipated in her mind, the tears in the eyes of the mystical silver fox rolled down. She wanted to open her mouth and shout, but when the words reached her throat, they seemed to be choked by something. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't spit them out. Her chest was tumbling. Although Wisdom King was dead, she didn't feel the slightest pleasure of revenge. Instead, a sense of extreme sadness and sorrow enveloped her heart. The mystical silver fox smiled sadly. She murmured to herself in a low voice, "My enemy. If you had treated me with such sincerity in your previous life, it would have been more than this." The tears of the mystical silver fox kept falling. She looked up at the gods and Buddhas in the sky. She smiled and said, "Today I'm not afraid of you. It's because I, the mystical silver fox, am a person who keeps his promise." The mystical silver fox wiped her tears hard. Her expression became extremely firm and unruly again. She suddenly raised her head and let out an earth-shattering roar. In an instant, a white aura gushed out of her body and quickly spread in all directions between heaven and earth. Then, another gray aura floated out of her body and floated in the air. At this moment, the 9 golden fox tails behind the flirtatious woman slowly disappeared. When she slowly opened her eyes, her blood-red pupils had once again turned into pitch-black pupils. After the mystical silver fox left, Su-chan woke up again. She looked around in confusion and found that not far away, her beloved man was standing there like a stone statue, motionless. Su-chan blinked her eyes. She moved and flew to Li Yundong's side in an instant. She reached out her hand and touched Li Yundong's cheek tentatively and timidly. She shouted in a low voice, "Yundong. It's me. It's your little girl. Your Chaner is back. You open your eyes and have a look. Have a look at your little girl." But at this time, no matter how Su-chan shouted, the invincible reincarnated Wisdom King no longer responded. The old man who had once laughed and played with the little girl did not move at all. At that moment, the world was extremely quiet. Only cries of sorrow and sorrow reverberated in the mountains, resounding in everyone's hearts. Chapter 938. Su-chan's mournful cries were like an invisible hand, squeezing the hearts of everyone. Even the cultivators of the various sects in Zhongri, who had hated Li Yundong's behavior because he had gone against the heaven, were silent at this time, and their hearts were shocked. Even the gods and Buddhas in the sky were silent at this time. After a while, the golden light in the sky sprinkled down, and the sound of Buddha's name echoed in the air. The great ancestors of the 3 pure ones first slowly returned to the cracks in the clouds along the golden-stepped jade platform, and then the gods and Buddhas in the sky disappeared one by one. The figures of Buddha Tathagata, the 4 wisdom kings, the 4 great bodhisattvas, the 500 arhats, and the 3,000 vajras disappeared one by one. When the last figure disappeared, a figure slowly appeared in the air, surrounded by golden light. He sat cross-legged and put his palms together. Everyone looked up and vaguely saw the appearance of Purin. The man said in a clear voice in the air, Amitabha, put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha immediately. Good. After he finished speaking, his figure flashed and disappeared into the crack in the clouds. The thick clouds in the sky twisted and rotated, and soon drifted away in all directions. After a while they disappeared without a trace as if they had never appeared. The sky was still blue and clear as if it had been washed. All the cultivation sects in Zhongri looked at the sky in a daze. Many people couldn't believe that all this was over for a while. Zhang Tongtian, the leader of the Qingqing sect, let out a long sigh, turned his head and said to Zhang Huashui, "Let's go. It's time to go back." Zhang Huashui looked at Su Chan and said, "But Shixiang the fox Zen schooled." Zhang Tongtian shook his head. "Death is like a lamp going out. Since the mystical silver fox has also disappeared, Li Wudi has already given us the best explanation. Let's go." Zhang Huashui stared at Su Chan, who was holding Li Yundong in the air and crying sadly. Even though he was a rough man, he couldn't help but sigh at this time. This son of a bitch is really affectionate. With a wave of his arm, he led the disciples of the Qingqing sect down the mountain. With someone taking the lead, there were soon people following. Ise Chuyun and Ise Xinguang of the Ise Shinto looked at each other. Ise Xinguang shook his head and sighed. "I didn't expect the final result to be like this." Si Chuyun looked at Li Yundong, who was already silent, with a complicated look in her eyes. She sighed softly and said, "What is love in the world? It's only love in life." Ai Chuyun raised her head and stared blankly at the sky for a while. Then she said faintly, "Xinguangjun, let's go. It's time to go back." As soon as the two of them took the lead and left, the Japanese cultivators also cleaned up the battlefield and collected the corpses, preparing to leave. At the foot of the mountain, some of them were crying as they gathered the corpses of their friends and relatives together. Some were chanting the rebirth mantra to release the souls of the dead. All kinds of sounds were coming from the foot of the mountain. It was very noisy. On the other side, the sound seemed to have been cut off. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others didn't seem to be able to hear it. Especially Su Chan, tears streaming down her face. She kept calling Li Yundong's name in a low voice, as if she was eager for him to open his eyes in the next second. Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao also cried silently. As soon as Li Yundong fell down, it seemed that the whole sky had collapsed. Although the sun was shining brightly above their heads, it was as if they were in an icehouse in the harsh winter. In front of them, it was as if there was nothing but darkness and no light. Lin Miao walked to Su Chan's side and reached out to pull her sleeve, but her hand froze in the air. She said in a low voice, "Don't cry. If Master knew that you were so sad, he would be even more sad." Hearing this, Su Chan wiped the tears on her cheeks. She smiled sweetly and said with tears in her eyes, "You're right. Yundong doesn't like me crying, so I have to smile. I have to smile." She said it with a smile, but the tears in her eyes kept falling like pearls from a broken string. She wiped them away and smiled. Then she said to Li Yundong, "Yundong, you have to wake up quickly. I will be fine. I will wait for you to wake up with a smile, okay?" When Lin Miao and Ruan Hongling heard this, their hearts ached even more. Lin Miao turned around, covered her mouth, and sobbed. At this time, Zhou Qin woke up faintly. As soon as she woke up, she immediately jumped up and rushed to Li Yundong's side like crazy. She stretched out her hands toward Li Yundong, but when she saw Su Chan smiling and wiping her tears in midair, her hands involuntarily froze in place. Zhou Qin was trembling all over. She looked straight at Li Yundong, only to see that his expression was calm, and there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, as if he had just fallen asleep. Zhou Qin only felt as if her internal organs had been torn apart, and the pain was so great that she wanted to die immediately. Zhou Qin's tears flowed down, but her eyes became redder and redder. Her eyes were full of murderous intent and fierce light. She couldn't help turning her head to look at the cultivators of the various sects who had not left yet. She panted for a while with a ferocious face, then suddenly jumped up and rushed toward them. At this time, the calmest among these people was Lin Miao. She had been by Li Yundong's side these days and had also noticed Zhou Qin's love and feelings for Li Yundong. She knew her character better, so she had been paying attention to her, for fear that she would lose control of her emotions and cause a terrible disaster. When Lin Miao saw Zhou Qin turn her head, her eyes were extremely ferocious, and her heart trembled. When Zhou Qin moved, she immediately stood in front of Zhou Qin and said anxiously, "Eldest Shiji, don't go. Do you want everything Master has done to be in vain?" The blue veins on Zhou Qin's forehead bulged, and the blood in her eyes burst open. She shouted, "Get out of my way. If you stand in front of me again, I will kill you too." Lin Miao was not afraid. Instead, she grabbed her hand and said anxiously, "Eldest Shiji, calm down. Master is so powerful. Maybe there is a way to save him. If you are so impulsive, what if he wakes up one day and finds out what you have done? What will he do then?" This sentence hit Zhou Qin's weak spot. Although she knew that Li Yundong had committed suicide, she still hoped that he could wake up in the depths of her heart. The blood in her eyes gradually disappeared, replaced by an incomparably deep sadness. She covered her face and suppressed her surging emotions. She choked and said, "His soul and yang spirit have disappeared. How can he be saved?" At this time Ziyuan, who was also like a stone in meditation, trembled all over, and a voice suddenly sounded in her blank mind. "Once Jin Dan appears, the fate of the mortal world is set, and the first thunder is heard to see the truth. The spirit mirror is easy to break, and the immortal sword can't break the red rope." Yun Hai sits and looks at old Yun Hai and talks about the wind and dust in front of the stone. Chang'e has no regrets about stealing the elixir. Why should Hong Yang envy Zhang Sheng? This sentence was like a big bell buzzing in Ziyuan's mind. At this moment she suddenly woke up. Yes, only the first 6 sentences of the psalm that Master left me have come true. The last 2 sentences haven't come true. Chang'e has no regrets about stealing the elixir. Stealing the elixir. If this psalm is true, doesn't it mean that Li Yundong is not completely dead and there are elixirs that can save him? Thinking of this, Ziyuan immediately became energetic as if she had come back to her senses. She said firmly in her heart, "It must be like this. The first 6 sentences of this psalm have come true. It's impossible that the last 2 sentences won't come true. Li Yundong must not be dead yet. He can definitely be saved." Ziyuan kept repeating these words in her heart as if she was hypnotizing herself. She quickly rushed to Li Yundong's side, flipped her wrist, and took out a purple bottle she carried with her. She poured out several 9-flower jade pills from it and stuffed them into Li Yundong's mouth as if they were free. She moved in a hurry and her fingers trembled. The 9-flower jade pills, which were worth thousands of gold coins, slipped from the corner of Li Yundong's closed mouth and fell to the ground. She didn't even look at them. She just gently pinched Li Yundong's cheek with one hand and sent the pills into his mouth. At this time, although Li Yundong's soul and yang spirit were completely broken and he was like a vegetable, the pill melted in his mouth. After a while, it turned into a clear stream and merged into his body. Ziyuan stretched out her hand and nervously felt the pulse of Li Yundong's wrist. But after a while she saw that after the medicinal power of the 9-flower jade pills entered Li Yundong's body, it was like a clay ox sinking into the sea. There was no movement at all. Her heart tightened and she couldn't help but think quickly. It seems that ordinary pills are no longer enough. There must be peerless elixirs. But, where can I find such a peerless elixir that can bring people back to life? Su Chan and Zhou Qin, who were next to her, saw Ziyuan's movements. They both knew that Ziyuan had always been calm and intelligent. She wouldn't do something meaningless for no reason. Therefore, seeing her movements at this time, they couldn't help but feel a sense of hope in their hearts. Su Chan blinked her tearful eyes and said timidly and eagerly, "Sister Ziyuan, do you have a way to save Yundong?" Zhou Qin didn't say anything. She just clenched her fists and stared at Ziyuan nervously. Ziyuan opened her mouth and glanced at the two of them. Originally she wanted to say yes, but when she saw the eagerness and hope in their eyes, she felt countless timidity and fear in her heart. She was afraid that if she failed, if the poem was wrong, if she didn't save Li Yundong, if she couldn't find the elixir, then she would give them hope and destroy it. They would definitely not be able to bear such a heavy blow. Ziyuan said bitterly in a low voice, "No. I just... She said a few words in a row, but in the end she didn't finish her sentence. However, Su Chan smiled sweetly and said to Ziyuan, "Sister Ziyuan, it's okay. With me accompanying Yundong you can do whatever you want. Even if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter." As she said this, she turned her head and looked at Li Yundong in a daze. She choked up in a low voice and said, "I have become a devil that is condemned by all. He has never given up on me, nor has he abandoned me. Now that he has become like this, I will not leave him. As long as he doesn't wake up, I will be here with him. If he doesn't wake up for a year, I will be here with him for a year. If he doesn't wake up for a lifetime, I will be here with him forever. Su Chan said in a daze, he must also want me to be with him. Ziyuan looked at Su Chan and felt sad. She tried hard not to cry and nodded to Su Chan. Then she turned to Zhou Qin and said, Zhou Qin, take care of them. I'll leave for a while. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan had been together for a long time. She knew that Ziyuan had a calm temperament. If she wasn't 100% sure, there were some things that she would never say. At this time, Ziyuan's actions must mean that she was sure of something, but she wasn't sure, so she didn't dare to tell them. Zhou Qin thought about it for a while and didn't ask what Ziyuan was going to do. She just nodded and couldn't help but feel a little hopeful in her heart. As soon as people had hope, their sadness immediately decreased a lot. Zhou Qin wiped away her tears and said, Go. I'm here. Ziyuan forced a smile and finally turned her head to leave. Chapter 939. An unprecedented battle had come to an end, and Mount Tianlong soon became deserted. The cultivators who had left had cleaned up the blood and corpses on the ground. Only by pulling up the ground full of fallen leaves and withered grass could one see the dark bloodstains deep under the ground. Ding Nan, who had once helped Li Yundong, stood beside him in a daze, not knowing where to go. She stared at Li Yundong and the scenes in the school appeared in front of her eyes. For a moment she was filled with emotion and tears welled up in her eyes. Ding Nan was crying not only because of the relationship between Li Yundong and Su Chan, but also because of her bad fate. Why wasn't she the person for whom Li Yundong would rather die? Why wasn't she the one who could stand by Li Yundong's side and take care of his affairs? Just as she was crying silently, Zhao Jing, Song Guohua, and the others from the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua arrived. They were out of breath after running and came to Ding Nan's side, looking around blankly and doubtfully. Song Guohua asked curiously, Where are they? Leader, where are the people of the other sects? Are they all gone? No way? Zhao Jing looked at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. She soon found Lin Miao beside him and couldn't help but be overjoyed. She couldn't help rushing over and shouting in English, Chris, Chris. I see you again. She had just run a few steps when she saw Lin Miao turn around. Her face was still covered with tears and her eyes were full of tears. She raised her hand and blocked Zhao Jing in front of her. Her voice was choked, but it revealed a sense of firmness and determination. She said in Chinese, There is no Chris here, only Lin Miao, only Li Yundong's disciple Lin Miao. The ecstasy on Zhao Jing's face suddenly froze. She suddenly felt that Lin Miao in front of her was extremely strange, as if she had never known her before. Zhao Jing tentatively asked in awkward Chinese, Kuch. Lin Miao, what's wrong with you? At this time Lin Miao couldn't help but shed tears. Don't you see that my master is dead? Alba, just go. If you want to go back to your country, go back. Don't disturb me. Let me have some peace. Zhao Jing was shocked. She looked at Li Yundong, only to see that the boy who used to talk and laugh was now motionless like a clay puppet. The girls beside him were all in tears. She didn't have a deep friendship with Li Yundong, so she naturally didn't have any feelings for him. Zhao Jing smiled awkwardly. She looked at Ding Nan next to her, then carefully said to Lin Miao, since you no longer have a master, then, why don't you take my master as your master? That way we can be together. Before she could finish, Lin Miao was furious and shouted, A teacher for a day is a father for a lifetime. Haven't you heard of this saying? Get lost, get lost. Zhao Jing was forced by Lin Miao's aura and involuntarily took 2 steps back. She said timidly, I was just saying. Why are you so angry? She was about to say something when she saw Ding Nan wiping away her tears and shouting, Zhao Jing. Zhao Jing was startled. She quickly walked over to Ding Nan and said cautiously, Master. Ding Nan's voice was cold as she said, Come back with me. Zhao Jing turned her head to look at Lin Miao and then at Li Yundong. She said, But Master. Ding Nan's voice suddenly became harsh and fierce. If I ask you to go back, then go back. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Zhao Jing immediately shivered and didn't dare to say anything more. She followed Ding Nan step by step. Ding Nan turned to leave, but before she left, she said to Zhou Qin, if you need any help, tell me. Speaking of this, she seemed to be afraid that Zhou Qin would misunderstand, so she added, I'm doing this for Li Yundong, not you. At this time, Zhou Qin was not in the mood to care about the past disputes with Ding Nan. She smiled sadly and said, If you can save him, I will do anything you want me to do. Ding Nan's expression darkened and she said in a low voice, Me too. At this moment, the two of them couldn't help raising their heads and looking at each other. In an instant they could feel the sorrow in each other's hearts. In this world, only enemies understood each other the best. Ding Nan and Zhou Qin were like this. They used to be friends, but then they became enemies. Only the two of them could best understand each other's deep feelings of loss, but they couldn't get anything out of it. Ding Nan looked at Zhou Qin with a complicated look in her eyes and said, "When this matter is over, I will settle the score with you. Before that, I will let you go." The corner of Zhou Qin's mouth twitched. She said, "Me too." Ding Nan turned her head and glanced in the direction of the immortal pen in the stone room. She wanted to take the powerful magical weapon back, but she felt that taking it back at this time would be adding insult to injury. Although she never minded hitting others when they were down, there were always exceptions to everything. Li Yundong was the only person she would never do it to. After taking a look, Ding Nan struggled in her heart. Finally she turned around and left. Like Zhou Qin and the others, although she knew that Li Yundong's soul had disappeared, she still hoped that Li Yundong could come back to life one day. Ding Nan and the others were the last to leave. Mount Tianlong fell into complete silence. Su Chan seemed to be unable to hear or see anything around her. At this time there was only Li Yundong in her eyes. She stood beside Li Yundong in a daze and kept whispering in his ear, telling him everything that had happened between them. Zhou Qin stood to one side and looked at them silently. She didn't go forward, nor did she leave. She was like a guardian, lonely. At this time, Ziyuan flew quickly to Mount Longhu. As soon as she got close to Mount Longhu, she landed and quickly rushed to the mountain where the Linggong sect was located. Her figure was like lightning, and it didn't take long for her to rush into the Taoist field of the Linggong sect. The Taoist field was now useless. There were still horizontal strips on the door, and the ground was overgrown with weeds. The beams and windows were densely covered with cobwebs. Ziyuan ran all the way and suddenly she brought up a cloud of dust. She was shocked, but the dust behind her was rolling in the air, unable to fall for a long time. Ziyuan passed through a cave, passed through a lotus pond and rushed into the stone cave. She moved her 5 fingers on a smooth wall, and a pale yellow ripple appeared where her fingers passed. When these ripples were strung together, they formed a strange and exquisite rune. After Ziyuan finished drawing the rune, she pressed her palm on it. Suddenly the wall made a cracking sound and a shelf stretched out from the wall. On the shelf were several thread-bound books, but these books were wrapped in fluorescent threads. Ziyuan knew that this was a small magic formation set up to prevent someone from stealing the books. If someone forcibly took the books, the tiny threads on them would easily tear the books into pieces. Ziyuan carefully pressed her palm on the bookshelf and poured her spiritual power and jinqi into it. After a while, the bookshelf emitted a burst of light, and the lustrous threads on it retracted into the bookshelf one by one. Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief, picked up the book and began to read. She read 10 lines at a time, quickly looking for the chapter on elixirs in the book. When she turned to the chapter on elixirs, she heard a rustling sound behind her. Ziyuan was suddenly shocked, and the 9th heaven Ziyuan silk that she carried with her instantly stabbed behind her like a furious thunder. As soon as the 9th heaven Ziyuan silk moved, she heard a familiar voice scream from the lotus pond outside the stone cave. "Shiji, it's me." Ziyuan was shocked again. She immediately moved her heart and mind, and the 9th heaven Ziyuan silk stopped in front of Ruan Hongling in an instant. Ziyuan walked out of the stone cave quickly, only to see Ruan Hongling squatting beside the lotus pond. One hand was wet, and the other was gently holding a lotus seed. Ziyuan asked in surprise, "Why are you here? What are you doing here?" Ruan Hongling forced a smile and said, "Shiji, I'm remaking Chao Kefi's soul." Ziyuan took a closer look and saw that the lotus seed in Ruan Hongling's hand was crystal clear, emitting a soft white light. She could vaguely see a person's figure in it. She sighed softly and said, "It's really hard for you to think of this now. My heart is in a mess and I didn't think of this at all. I'm really ashamed." Ruan Hongling carefully placed the lotus seed in her hand on a lotus leaf and squatted by the pond, staring at it intently. It wasn't until the lotus seed slowly grew a stem that she turned around and stood up. She asked curiously, "Shiji, why are you here?" Hearing this, Ziyuan was stunned. She didn't know how to answer, so she subconsciously hid the book in her hand behind her back. Ruan Hongling was also a very smart person. She looked over and saw that Ziyuan was holding the Taoist treasure Jingyi Taoist canon in her hand. She was suddenly stunned. Taoist canon was an encyclopedia that gathered almost all the history, illusions, magic, elixirs, the origin of the sect, and so on. Although this kind of book was also sold to the outside world, there was a huge difference between the part sold to the outside world and the part collected by the cultivation sects themselves. This was especially true when it came to pills, spells and so on. Cultivation sects naturally had their reservations. Some of the books sold to the outside world recorded the method of making pills, but they often lacked a key ingredient. The Taoist canon that was kept in the sect's own storage not only recorded the method of making pills, but also the pill's origin, medicinal properties, usage, and the location where the sect stored the pills. The Taoist scriptures were as vast as the sea. Flipping through a piece of information was like looking for a needle in a haystack. The thick book in Ziyuan's hand was just a general outline. She could only find the content she was looking for by flipping through the corresponding content and following the map. When Ruan Hongling saw that Ziyuan had rushed back to the sect and was reading Jingyi Taoist canon at this time, a thought flashed through her mind. She asked in surprise, "Shiji, do you want to refine elixirs to save Li Yundong?" Seeing that Ruan Hongling had understood, Ziyuan stopped hiding. She shook her head helplessly and said, "How can I refine a life-saving elixir in such a hurry? I just want to find out what kind of elixirs in the world can bring people back to life." Ruan Hongling sighed and said, "Where can I find them? Shiji Ziyuan, have you found them?" Ziyuan shook her head and said, "I haven't found them, but..." Ruan Hongling's heart skipped a beat and she hurriedly asked, "But what?" Ziyuan hesitated for a moment, bit her lip gently and said, "I think that no matter what the elixir is, I always feel that it has been made." Ruan Hongling exclaimed and said quickly, "Shiji, are you thinking about that psalm? Do you want to steal the elixir?" Ziyuan sighed and said, "Do I have a better choice?" Ruan Hongling said, "But do you know where the elixir is?" Ziyuan said, "I know, but I'm not sure." Ruan Hongling's eyes suddenly widened. "Where is it?" Ziyuan couldn't help but look up at the main peak of Mount Longhu. She said in a seemingly irrelevant manner, "I've been wondering, why did the Jingyi school suddenly want to rebuild the Sanju Formation?" Ruan Hongling blurted out, "You mean, they built the Sanju Formation to protect the elixir? What kind of elixir could make them value it so much?" Ziyuan said softly, "No matter what it is, I have to go and have a look. But before that, I have to find out where the elixir is usually stored in the Jingyi school." Ruan Hongling was shocked. "Shiji, you know about the Sanju Formation but you still want to go? You will die." Ziyuan turned her face, her eyes full of sadness. "Master is gone, and if Li Yundong is also gone, then what's the point of living?" As she said this, she turned around faintly and continued to walk into the stone cave to look up the Taoist canon. Ruan Hongling stared blankly at Ziyuan's figure. It was the first time that she had seen her Shiji admit her inner feelings in front of her. For a moment, her heart was in turmoil and she was stunned. Chapter 940. Late at night, the sky above Mount Longhu was covered with dark clouds, and the sky was drizzling like a crisp rain. From time to time, a series of lightning flashed through the clouds, illuminating the world. Mount Longhu was located in the darkness of this rainy night, like a silent giant. The low thunder in the sky rumbled, majestic and solemn. Ziyuan stood at the entrance of the cave residence of the Linggong sect. She raised her head and looked at the sky, motionless as if she was waiting for something silently. She didn't know how long she had waited like this. Suddenly she saw a golden light flash on the main peak of Mount Longhu and go straight into the thunderclouds. Suddenly there was a loud thunder and lightning. Seeing this, Ziyuan's eyes suddenly narrowed, and her eyes were firm and decisive. She had been waiting for the arrival of the thunderstorm for the past few days. She was waiting for Zhang Tianshi, who was the greatest threat to her, to plunge into the thunderclouds to transcend the thunder tribulation. Now she had finally waited for this opportunity. She immediately moved and rushed toward the main peak of the Jingyi school. However, not long after Ziyuan rushed out, a person suddenly appeared beside her. Ziyuan turned her head and saw that the person beside her had a ponytail and a bright forehead. Although it was night, it was still difficult to hide her beauty. It was her shimmy Ruan Hongling. Ziyuan suddenly stopped and said in surprise and anger, "Hongling, didn't I tell you not to follow me?" Ziyuan knew that this trip was extremely dangerous. Jingyi school had spent a lot of manpower and material resources to rebuild the Sanju Formation, so it must be extremely powerful. Even if Li Yundong was still alive and the mystical silver fox was still alive, if they accidentally entered the Sanju Formation, they would probably end up being annihilated. Although Ziyuan was already a master of the Thunder Tribulation, there was still a big gap between her and Li Yundong and the mystical silver fox. She knew that it was very likely that she would not be able to come back from this trip, so she deliberately asked Ruan Hongling to carefully take care of Chao Kefi's soul by the lotus pond in the stone cave these days, while she herself was at the entrance of the cave, paying close attention to the situation of the main peak of Mount Longhu. But what Ziyuan didn't expect was that although Ruan Hongling had promised her well, as soon as Ziyuan left the cave residence, she followed her. Ruan Hongling usually followed Ziyuan's lead. Especially when Ziyuan was angry, she didn't dare to contradict her. If she said to go west, she would never go east. But at this time, there was a firm and decisive look in Ruan Hongling's eyes. She said, "Shiji, now there are only the two of us left in the Lingong sect. Do you think I will let you take the risk alone? Have you ever thought about what I would do if something happened to you?" Ziyuan's heart trembled when she heard this, but her face was still full of anger. She scolded, "No, your cultivation is not high enough. You can't go with me." However, Ruan Hongling did not back down and asked, "Senior sister, your cultivation is indeed much higher than mine, but no matter how high your cultivation is, if you enter the Sanju formation and cause it to be activated, do you think you can escape? Is there any difference between a lightning tribulation expert and a person like me in the triple terminal formation?" Ziyuan was silent for a while. She knew that what Ruan Hongling said was true, and she couldn't refute it. But she still didn't want Ruan Hongling to take the risk with her, so she said earnestly, "Hongling, I still have a chance to escape alone. If there are two of us. I really. At this point, Ziyuan's voice was already trembling a little and she couldn't go on. Ruan Hongling's eyes were also red and tears flowed down her cheeks. In the rain, the tears and raindrops mixed together, and it was hard to distinguish between tears and rain. She sobbed and said, "Shiji, don't worry, I will never hold you back. I'm just begging you to take me with you. You used to bring me with you for everything, but ever since you left the mountain you don't tell me anything and you don't take me with you anymore. Am I still your junior sister?" Ziyuan sighed and gently wiped the water and tears from Ruan Hongling's face. She said softly, "Then you have to promise me that if anything happens, you have to leave immediately and don't care about me. Do you understand?" Ruan Hongling wiped her tears hard and nodded. "I understand." Ziyuan stared at her. Seeing her firm expression, she didn't know if she had listened to her. Ziyuan didn't want to waste any more time. After a sigh, she continued to rush toward the main peak of Mount Longhu, with Ruan Hongling quickly following behind her. After the earth-shattering battle, almost everything had been settled, so Mount Longhu had also relaxed a lot. In addition, it was late at night, and it was also the precious moment. Almost all the cultivators were cultivating in meditation. Zhang Tianshi, the strongest person in the Jingyi school, had also gone into the thunderclouds to transcend the lightning tribulation. Therefore, the defense of Mount Longhu had almost dropped to an unprecedented level. Ziyuan herself was a master of the lightning tribulation and an inner disciple. She was extremely good at hiding her aura and traces. Therefore, although she was carrying Ruan Hongling, whose cultivation was not high, she could still easily sneak into the main peak from the side peak. The two of them arrived at the main peak of the Jingyi school, passed through the mountain gate, walked along the stone steps, and arrived in front of the majestic Taoist master's mansion. At this time, there were only two middle-aged Taoist priests on duty in front of the gate. Under the cover of the goddess Nyan seal, Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling carefully passed under their noses. After passing through the main hall of the Taoist master's mansion, they walked nervously and vigilantly to the back hall. After walking for a while, they saw that the courtyard around them was getting darker and darker, and it was frighteningly quiet. Ruan Hongling looked around and saw that the night was as thick as ink. No matter how hard she looked, she couldn't see where they were going to hide the elixir. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but send a voice transmission to Ziyuan, saying, "Shiji, do you know where the elixir is hidden?" Ziyuan also looked around and then said, "If I'm not wrong, we should be able to guess where the elixir is hidden according to the density of the spiritual qi around us." Ruan Hongling said, "The place with the densest spiritual qi should be the Sanju formation, right?" Ziyuan nodded and said, "Yes, the Sanju formation is very powerful. If there are no powerful magical weapons and cultivators with strong spiritual qi guarding it, there will definitely be amazing murderous intent and spiritual power soaring into the sky, triggering all kinds of strange phenomena. Therefore, we only need to follow the direction with the densest spiritual qi." Ruan Hongling nodded and continued to follow Ziyuan carefully, not saying anything more. After observing for a while, Ziyuan closed her eyes slightly and the yang spirit in her body went out. In an instant, it turned into countless extremely tiny spots of light and spread in all directions. Not long after, these spots of light quickly gathered from all directions and formed Ziyuan's yang spirit again. Soon, Ziyuan's yang spirit entered her body. She opened her eyes and said, "I see. Follow me." Ziyuan leaped up and quickly went into the depths of the back hall. After passing through a series of palaces and wing rooms, They finally arrived at the cliff at the back of the main peak of Mount Longhu. Ziyuan stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down. It was dark at the bottom of the mountain, like the mouth of a giant beast. It was extremely terrifying. Ruan Hongling also stretched out her head to take a look and couldn't help but say in surprise, "Shiji, are you sure it's here? There's no way out." Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, "Come down with me." After that, she leaped up and flew down the cliff. Ruan Hongling also flew over. The two of them slowly descended along the steep cliff, carefully looking around with the help of the lightning from time to time. Soon, Ziyuan found that there was a talisman carved on the cliff in front of her. Her heart skipped a beat and she immediately looked to the side. Sure enough, there were other talismans carved regularly not far away. Ziyuan immediately turned her wrist, and a beating cyan flame appeared in her palm, illuminating the surroundings. She used the light of the flame to take a closer look and saw that the talismans were gathering in one place from all directions. They were getting closer and closer, and the closer they were to the center, the denser they were. She immediately flew toward the center of the talismans. As soon as she flew over, she saw a huge stone beast standing on the cliff. It was an azure dragon entrenched in a ball. Ziyuan was stunned. Soon she looked at the other side of the diagonal. Her body moved and she flew to a place more than 100 meters away. Sure enough, she found the same scene. In the surrounding talisman matrix, there was a stone beast standing in it. It was the vermilion bird. At this time, Ruan Hongling also reacted. She whispered, "Sister Ziyuan, are these 4 mythological beasts guarding the spiritual medicine we are looking for?" Ziyuan shook her head. "It's not that simple. These 4 mythological beasts and so many talisman matrices should be specially designed to suppress the amazing murderous aura and spiritual energy of the Sanju formation." After she finished speaking, she flew toward the center of the 4 mythological beasts. After flying for a distance, she found 2 swords stuck in a stone wall. The hilts of these 2 swords went straight into the rock wall. There were weeds and shrubs growing on the cliff around them. If she didn't look closely, she wouldn't have been able to find them at all. Ziyuan pushed aside the weeds and shrubs and saw that there were extremely small and dense talismans around the hilts of the swords. There was a burst of dark red light in the lines of the talismans, which was faintly discernible. Ziyuan saw that the engravings around the talisman matrices were old, but there was no rust on the hilts of the 2 long swords as if they were new. She couldn't help but be stunned and turned to look at Ruan Hongling. Ruan Hongling also looked at the 2 swords in surprise. Although her cultivation was not high, she was also an inner disciple and had a lot of knowledge. She whispered, "Shiji, these 2 swords are a little strange. Could it be the mechanism to open the Sanju formation?" Ziyuan raised her arm and wiped the cliff with her slender hand. In an instant, countless tiny balls of fire ignited one after another, like a faint wall of fire. This wall of fire illuminated the cliff, making it extremely clear. Ziyuan's figure floated away in an instant. After looking at it from a distance, she wiped her hand again, and the wall of fire disappeared in an instant. Not even a single weed was ignited. Ziyuan's figure flashed back to Ruan Hongling's side and said, "You're right, but also wrong. If I'm not wrong, these 2 swords should be the key magic weapons to block the murderous aura and spiritual energy of the Sanju formation. As long as we pull out these 2 swords, the Sanju formation should be opened and we should be able to enter." Ruan Hongling's heart trembled. At the last moment she suddenly felt timid. Looking at the 2 sword hilts, her eyes flashed. Ziyuan seemed to have sensed her heart and said softly to her, "Hongling, you've already accompanied me here. Why don't you go back first?" However, Ruan Hongling gritted her teeth and reached out to hold one of the hilts. She said, "Shiji, don't you see that there are 2 swords here? Obviously 2 people need to draw the swords at the same time. And if I'm not wrong, the strength and speed of the 2 people should be the same. Otherwise it will cause the formation to backfire, right?" Ziyuan sighed and said in a slow and solemn tone, "Hongling, you're right, but you have to think it through. If we open the formation there will be no turning back." Ruan Hongling said firmly, "Shiji, you can't open this formation alone. Don't say any more. We've already come this far. How can we go back?" Ziyuan didn't say anything more. She nodded, took a deep breath, and slowly reached out to the hilt of the other sword. Chapter 941. Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling stretched out their hands at the same time and held the hilt of the sword on the cliff. In an instant, light patterns appeared on the hilt of the sword, and the cliff began to tremble violently and stones rustled down. Shrimpy, calm Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling had grown up together. They were almost inseparable when they ate and cultivated. In terms of telepathy, they might not be as good as the twins Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, but compared to others they were much stronger. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. At the same time, they exerted their strength and slowly pulled out the long swords in their hands. For a moment, the long swords made a violent and ear-piercing sound of friction with the cliff wall, which was extremely ear-piercing in the middle of the night. Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling were extremely nervous. Their palms, which were holding the hilts of the swords, were full of sweat. They were afraid of alarming the many cultivators of the Jingyi school. They couldn't help but look at each other again. At the same time, they gritted their teeth and pulled out the long swords with all their might. With a clang, the two long swords were immediately pulled out by the two of them. The long swords shone brilliantly, and the sword light soared into the sky. After the swords were pulled out, a burst of colorful divine light immediately appeared in the two original sword grooves. The colors were extremely bright and colorful. Then the stone wall rumbled and slowly opened, revealing a huge stone cave inside. The stone cave was full of all kinds of colorful light, which was dazzling and dazzling. The long swords in Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling's hands also trembled violently at this time, making a buzzing sound. After a while they shattered into countless dust and disappeared in their hands. Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling looked at their hands in surprise. After looking at each other nervously, Ziyuan bit her lip and said, "Hongling, wait outside. I'll go in and have a look." She moved and flew into the stone cave. However, as soon as she flew in, she saw Ruan Hongling following her. Ziyuan couldn't help but want to scold her, but when she saw the incomparably firm look between Ruan Hongling's eyebrows, her heart trembled and she couldn't help but sigh. Without saying anything more, she turned around and rushed inside. When the two of them entered the cave, they saw that both sides of the cave were filled with grooves that had been chiseled out. Within the grooves, there were densely packed spirit tablets and talismans. On the ground, there were many long swords that were stabbed into the ground one after another. Some of the swords didn't even have a hilt, some of the swords were half exposed, some of the swords were rusted, and some of the swords had a bone-piercing cold light. Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling took a closer look and were shocked. They recognized that many of the long swords here had been used by the previous leaders of the Jingyi school. Although they knew that they were in an extremely dangerous magic formation, they still couldn't help but widen their eyes and stand still. They looked at these swords in astonishment. Ruan Hongling pointed to the sword closest to her and said, "Isn't this Qing Yun, the personal sword of Zhang Ku, the 35th generation ancestor of our Jingyi school, Celestial Master Zhang?" Ziyuan couldn't help but stare at a blue long sword not far away and say, This seems to be the personal sword of our Lingong sect's ancestor, Shui Pei Jinren Shui." The two of them seemed to have entered the sword hall of the world's famous swords. They looked at the swords one by one and saw that the personal swords left behind by the ancestors of the Jingyi school and the Lingong sect were placed inside. Each long sword had an extremely glorious and legendary history. At this time, each sword stood quietly in this stone cave, like a huge sword grave. Shrimpy learning. Along the way the two of them were shaken and tongue-tied. Especially when they saw a 3 feet long Qingfeng sword in the lead and the 3 words engraved on the hilt, they were so shocked that they couldn't control themselves. The Dragon Tiger Cloud Spring Sword? This is the sword of ancestor Zhang Daoling. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but exclaim. She couldn't believe her eyes. This sword has been passed down to this day? Why didn't I know? Ziyuan said solemnly, "It seems that before the ancestors ascended, they would place their personal magic treasures and swords here. In the long run they formed an extremely powerful force. The Jingyi school used this force to rebuild the Sanju formation." Ruan Hongling withdrew her shocked gaze and looked forward again. She was shocked again. She stretched out her hand and said in a trembling voice, "Shiji, look." Ziyuan saw that at the end of the sword tunnel was a large stone room. From a distance, she could see that there was an extremely strong 7-colored light flowing inside. The light that had overflowed from the mouth of the stone cave had come from here. This light was extremely dense, as if 7-colored paint had been splashed into a ball and mixed together. It couldn't be disintegrated, but it didn't fuse with each other. It just slowly twisted and flowed, emitting an extremely dazzling light. Within this ball of light was a medicinal pot that was suspended in the air. This medicinal pot was shaped like a gourd, but it was completely dark green and slightly transparent. Even from afar, one could vaguely see that there was a fireball-like ball hidden within. Ziyuan only took a look at the medicine pot, and her pupils immediately widened. She couldn't help but tremble all over. Is this Guhong's powerful magic weapon? The heaven and earth pot? Ruan Hongling couldn't help but be ecstatic. She pulled Ziyuan's arm excitedly and said loudly, "Shiji, it's the heaven and earth pot. This is the heaven and earth pot." In the 5th volume of the Legend of the Immortals, Guhong had recorded his 2 powerful magic weapons. One was the hemp jade pole and the other was the heaven and earth pot. This powerful magic weapon not only had the ability to create 1,000 worlds out of thin air like the purple gold luo jade plate, but it was also the personal magic weapon used by Guhong, the founder of the Danding sect, for alchemy. In the Chinese cultivation world, when it came to alchemy magic weapons, the heaven and earth pot and the medicine king tripod would be mentioned. The former was the personal magic weapon of the founder of the Danding sect, and the latter was the personal magic weapon of Sun Simiao, the king of medicine. The effects of the two were extremely amazing, and it was hard to tell which was better. Ziyuan saw that the heaven and earth pot had been carefully preserved in the Sanju formation, and there were clearly visible elixirs in it. It was obvious that the elixirs were secretly being refined by the Jingyi school. Combined with the psalms left by Wang Yuanshan, Ziyuan immediately concluded that this must be the elixir that could bring people back to life. Thinking of this, Ziyuan did not hesitate. With a leap, she arrived in front of the heaven and earth kettle. With a wave of her slender hand and a wave of her sleeve, the colorful halo was immediately dispelled by Ziyuan, revealing the dark green heaven and earth kettle. Ziyuan reached out to grab the heaven and earth pot. Ruan Hongling, who was beside her, suddenly said in shock, "Shiji." Before she could finish speaking, she saw that Ziyuan had already grabbed the heaven and earth pot with one hand. As soon as her hand touched the green medicine pot, suddenly there was a loud clanging sound around her. In the passage where she had come in before, countless personal swords left by the ancestors of the Jingyi school and the Linggong sect floated up and pointed at Ziyuan from afar. They were full of murderous intent, and the sword light was shining in all directions. Ziyuan was shocked. Not only did she not release the medicine pot, but she also gritted her teeth and quickly poured out the elixir in the pot. She saw a thumb-sized pill roll out. The pill was red and glowed faintly. Even Ziyuan could not recognize what kind of pill it was. But now she was just trying to make a Hail Mary. She couldn't care less. With a flip of her wrist, she held the pill in her palm, and then shouted at Ruan Hongling, "Hongling, go!" But as soon as she finished speaking, she saw countless magic swords around her rushing toward Ziyuan. These were the personal swords used by the leaders of the Jingyi school and the Linggong sect. Each of them could be called a divine weapon. Their power was not much inferior to that of the Bahuang sword. With so many swords attacking together, the momentum was really too terrifying. Before she got close, all the hair on Ziyuan's body stood on end. Her heart trembled, and with a thought, the 9th heaven Ziyuan silk appeared in front of her in an instant, wrapping her tightly. Although the 9th heaven Ziyuan silk was an extremely powerful divine weapon, compared with so many magic swords, it was obviously weak. It was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. In addition, the cave was full of magic spells, talismans, and many magic swords formed the Sanju formation. Therefore, as soon as the two came into contact, the 9th heaven Ziyuan silk immediately collapsed and was instantly torn into countless pieces. Ziyuan's face changed drastically, and she looked extremely frightened. She saw that the magic swords had surrounded her so tightly that not even a drop of water could escape. Without thinking, she raised her hand and threw the pill at Ruan Hongling. She shouted, "Hongling, take the spiritual medicine and leave quickly." Ruan Hongling reacted quickly and caught it in her hand. She looked at Ziyuan, whose body was almost covered by the dense magic swords, in horror and shouted, "Shiji, what are you going to do?" Seeing that she was hesitating and unwilling to leave, Ziyuan couldn't help but shout, "Why don't you go? You will die if you stay. Go, go." After that, she clapped her hand and a gust of wind came out, slapping Ruan Hongling far away. Ruan Hongling's eyes were filled with tears. She gritted her teeth, turned her head, and quickly turned into a blue light and flew out of the cave. When Ziyuan saw her leave, her tense heart relaxed in an instant. A smile slowly appeared on her face and she was relieved and relieved. She raised her head as if she wanted to see the distant sky through the thick top of the cave, and also wanted to see the person she cared about in the deep and boundless sky. At this moment, the magic swords around Ziyuan slowly shrank back, layer by layer, circle by circle, like waves, layers upon layers, or like a bow that was being drawn. In the next second, thousands of arrows would be shot at the same time, instantly tearing this ethereal fairy into pieces. However, Ziyuan seemed to be unable to see these magic swords and magic weapons around her. Suddenly, scenes flashed before her eyes. It was clearly the little things that she and Li Yundong had met. When the two of them were driving together in Tibet, they didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They were busy in the kitchen, and they were trapped in the immortal tying rope together. She vaguely remembered a Taoist stroking a girl's head and saying with a smile, "Ziyuan, that person is your destiny. He is your love. Don't hide. You can't hide. Don't run away. You can't escape." This series of scenes flashed quickly in front of Ziyuan's eyes. Her heart trembled, and her eyes became confused in an instant. But gradually, a figure gradually appeared in these scenes. It was the scene of Li Yundong arduously trekking for Suchan, the 1,000-mile Zhuji phase, and the scene of Li Yundong challenging the 6 great sects alone for Suchan. Didn't they get to know each other because of that fox? Slowly these scenes appeared in front of Ziyuan's eyes. The days when Li Yundong and Suchan were together day and night. The intimate figures of the lovers swayed and swayed in front of her eyes, like the flickering candlelight in the depths of the dark and cold road, illuminating her soul and warming her heart. Gradually, a smile appeared on the corner of Ziyuan's mouth, warm and calm. Her eyes were no longer confused, struggling and confused. She waited for the moment of fate to come and said softly, "All the Tao ancestors, all the gods and Buddhas, all the ancestors. I hope you can forgive me for my sins and let Li Yundong and Suchan go. I, Ziyuan, am willing to bear any calamity or pain in the world. Even if my body is broken into pieces, I will never complain." Ziyuan formed a palm with one hand, lowered her head and smiled slightly. She slowly closed her eyes, but at the moment she closed her eyes, countless magic swords in the 3Ju formation made a deafening roar like a dragon and rushed toward her like a storm. I'm sorry everyone. I've been so busy today. In the afternoon I went to the company to report the bill. I was informed that I would meet the boss of Xuanlei Company in the evening. While waiting I took the time to finish the chapter in the company. I hope you can understand. Chapter 942. Rumble. Lightning flashed all over Mount Longhu and thunder rumbled. Flashes of golden light could be seen faintly in the thunder clouds. In a side room in the back hall of the Taoist master mansion, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were sitting cross-legged and meditating. Although the two of them were not great masters, their cultivation potential could be said to be rare in the world because they had reforged their bodies and souls with lotus seeds and lotus hearts in the lotus pond of the Linggong sect. In addition, the two of them were chosen to be the sword spirits of the 3 ultimate formation, and they themselves had the power to mobilize the 3 ultimate formation. Therefore, as long as their strength increased a little, the 3 ultimate formation would amplify their power in the formation. At this time they were meditating with their eyes closed, absorbing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth leaked from the heavenly thunder in the awakening thunderstorm. Suddenly their hearts skipped a beat, as if something heavy had stabbed them in the chest. They opened their eyes at the same time. Deng Yu's eyes widened, and she couldn't help but look in the direction of the Sanju formation. "Sister, it seems that there is something wrong with the Sanju formation." Deng Jiao didn't like to talk much, so she said briefly, "Let's go and have a look." The 2 charming twins immediately leaped out. As soon as they leaped out of the door, they saw a faint 7-colored divine light coming from the direction of the 3 extremes formation. The 2 of them looked at each other and were shocked. They immediately ran toward the 3 extremes formation. The farther they were from the Sanju formation, the weaker they were. However, the closer they were to the Sanju formation, the stronger they were. At first they could only run quickly. Although their speed was extremely fast, it was only a little faster than ordinary people. Compared with a young spirit master like Zhang Lufeng, they were much worse. However, the closer they got to the Sanju formation, the faster they moved, and the more vigorous the chi flowing in their bodies became. It was like a pot of water, more and more tumbling and boiling. When they came to the cliff at the back of the mountain, their bodies were flowing with amazing cyan light. With a stomp of their feet, they immediately jumped more than 10 meters away as if they were gliding. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at the cliff and saw a figure turning into a blue light and flashing out of the cave. The 2 of them were shocked, and Deng Yu blurted out, "Someone has entered the array." After the 2 of them were rescued, they had been living in the Jinyi school. Zhang Ling had taught them how to control and operate the Sanju formation. At this time, their minds and divine senses were closely connected with the Sanju formation. The moment they grabbed the hilt of the sword, they had already felt that something was wrong. When they arrived, they happened to see Ruan Hongling escaping from the Sanju formation with the spiritual medicine. Although Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were the masters of the 3 extremes great formation, the 2 of them lacked experience in fights of magical powers. Suddenly encountering such a situation, they did not know what to do. Should they chase after him, or should they enter the array to investigate? Deng Yu was usually talkative and witty, but when it came to such a situation she was really helpless. Deng Jiao, who was usually quiet, suddenly said, Let's go into the array and have a look. The person who just escaped seems to know her. The two of them were twins and their hearts were connected. As soon as Deng Jiao mentioned it, Deng Yu immediately exclaimed and said, I remember. It's Ruan Hongling, Jinren Ruan from the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect. Why is she here? Let's go and have a look, sister. The two of them jumped down the cliff hand in hand. Although they were wearing dark blue Taoist robes, the loose clothes almost completely covered their graceful bodies. When they fell, the strong wind surged, making their sleeves flutter wildly. Although it was late at night, the sky was rolling with thunder, and the earth was deep and gloomy with the flashes of lightning, they still looked like immortals who had descended to the world. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao continued to fall from the sky. The moment they reached the entrance of the cave, the seven-colored divine light that gushed out from the cave suddenly condensed into two seven-colored swords. These two seven-colored swords fell right under Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's feet, stopping their falling figures. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao seemed to have long been used to such a situation. They stood on the light sword, which was only 2 fingers wide, but their bodies did not shake at all. They stood steadily and flew into the cave with the light sword. As soon as the two of them flew into the cave, they saw that the Sanju formation had been activated automatically, and countless divine swords rushed toward Ziyuan like stormy waves. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao took a closer look and were shocked. They knew Ziyuan, not only at the inauguration ceremony but also at school. Especially when Ziyuan and Li Yundong had acted in The Legend of Sword and Fairy on the stage together, Ziyuan's immortal aura had left a deep impression on them. Although the two of them didn't know that it was Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling who had saved them and helped them rebuild their bodies, they knew that Ziyuan and Li Yundong were very close friends. The two of them were almost inseparable day and night. For the sake of Ziyuan, Li Yundong had fought at the inauguration ceremony. This matter had spread throughout the cultivation world and it could be said that everyone knew about it. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had a very deep love and reverence for Li Yundong. Naturally, they also had a very deep affection for Ziyuan. When they saw that Ziyuan was about to die in the Sanju formation, they were shocked and shouted in unison, "Stop!" The two of them were the sword spirits of the Sanju formation, and they were connected with the power of the formation and the magic weapons. Therefore, as soon as their minds moved, the divine swords that were flying out immediately stopped in mid-air. The edges of the swords that were closest to Ziyuan had almost pierced her skin, causing a trace of red blood to ooze out of her delicate skin. When Ziyuan heard this voice, her heart skipped a beat and she opened her eyes slightly. At a glance, she saw Deng Yu and Deng Jiao standing on a colorful light sword. Their figures were outstanding. She couldn't help but be stunned and blurted out, "Yuk?" Deng Yu also looked at Ziyuan in bewilderment and asked, "Jinren Ziyuan, why are you here?" As she spoke, she couldn't help but glance at the heaven and earth kettle next to her. She was stunned and vaguely felt that something was wrong. At this time, a few people suddenly flew in from the stone cave. The leader was dressed in a Taoist robe. Although his appearance was ordinary, there was a cinnabar dot between his eyebrows and a majestic appearance. It was Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling saw Ziyuan at a glance, and then she saw the empty heaven and earth kettle. She immediately trembled all over and shouted angrily, "Ziyuan, how dare you trespass into the forbidden area of Mount Longhu and steal the sun and moon flowing elixir? Are you crazy? Where is the elixir? Hand it over." The sun and moon flowing elixir? Ziyuan's face was as calm as a lake. She smiled slightly, lowered her eyes and said in a low voice, "I don't have the elixir, but I have a life." Ziyuan was familiar with many cultivation classics of both Buddhism and Taoism. When she heard Zhang Ling's words, she immediately realized that the elixir she had asked Ruan Hongling to take away was the magical elixir known as the reversal of the sun and moon, the flowing of the universe, the living eat the dead, and the dead eat the living. The earliest source of this elixir came from the book, The Deed of Understanding of the Book of Changes, written by Wei Boyang of the Eastern Han Dynasty. This book was the earliest systematic work on refining external elixirs in the Chinese cultivation world and even in the world. It was known as the Group of Elixir Scriptures and the King of Eternal Elixir Scriptures. This book detailed the refining method of external elixir. After several works such as textual research on the Deed of Understanding of the Book of Changes annotated by Zhu Shi, a Confucian master of the Song dynasty, Qin Weiwei, a famous Taoist priest of the Song dynasty, and exertion of the Deed of Understanding of the Book of Changes annotated by Yu Yan, a Taoist priest of the Yuan dynasty, the alchemy skills of the external alchemy sect had reached the pinnacle. Among them, the sun and moon flowing elixir was a magical elixir created by the founder of the Jingyi sect according to these classics. The effect of this elixir was to reverse the universe and reverse life and death. Its magic was indescribable. After Zhang Tianshi and the others of the Jingyi sect learned that the cultivation world was about to face a great calamity more than a decade ago, they had been preparing to deal with it. Not only had they prepared the absolute love-extinguishing formation, but they had also prepared the Sanju formation and this sun and moon flowing elixir. This was in case Zhang Tianshi, the sect master of the Jingyi sect, was unfortunately taken advantage of by the devil path before he achieved the Tao. At that time, if there was still a disciple of the Jingyi sect, he could use this elixir to save Zhang Tianshi, so that the incense of the Jingyi sect would not be extinguished. It could be said that such an elixir was of great significance to the Jingyi sect. It was comparable to a powerful magical weapon of the sect, but it had been stolen by Ziyuan. But the most hateful thing was that Ziyuan, a fairy who was usually otherworldly and elegant, had suddenly stolen the elixir that the Jingyi sect had secretly cultivated for many years. Now she had even said such a shameless thing. Zhang Ling was so angry that she jumped up and down. Zhang Ling was trembling all over. She pointed at Ziyuan and was so angry that she couldn't speak clearly. You good. Ziyuan, there was a way to heaven but you didn't take it. There was no door to hell but you still came. This time you've caused too much trouble. Zhou Ping, who was following behind Zhang Ling, glanced at Ziyuan. She saw that Ziyuan was unusually calm, as if she was completely unaware of the countless swords surrounding her. She also didn't notice that the blade of the god of death was on her neck, ferocious and cold. She just stood there lightly, the hem of her dress gently swaying on the ground. She was like a rosy cloud, unruffled and calm, as if everything in this world had nothing to do with her. It was as if she had already attained the Tao. Her calmness revealed an unusually strong power. This power had nothing to do with spiritual power or Jinqi. It was just the power produced by the transcendent bearing of a person who had put life and death aside. This kind of power made Zhou Ping's heart tremble. It was as if she had met this beautiful, elegant, and otherworldly woman for the first time. Since Zhang Tianhe was no longer infatuated with Ziyuan and became closer to Zhou Ping, her jealousy of Ziyuan had weakened a lot. At this time when she saw her she felt the same way. It was as if she had touched and understood Ziyuan's inner world. She understood the infatuation of what is love in the world? It is only called life and death. Zhou Ping couldn't help but say to Zhang Ling, "Master, why don't we leave this to sect leader?" Zhang Ling said angrily, "T, sect leader is undergoing thunder retribution now. Ziyuan has betrayed the sect. I want to remove her from Mount Longhu and revoke her right to inherit the position of sect leader of Linggong's sect." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao secretly breathed a sigh of relief when they heard this. They were afraid that Zhang Ling would get angry and ask them to kill Ziyuan on the spot in the Sanju formation. If that was the case they really didn't know what to do. But not long after they were happy they heard Zhang Ling shout angrily, "Deng Yu, Deng Jiao! Seal the Sanju formation and lock Ziyuan in it. She will never be released." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were shocked. Deng Yu couldn't help but exclaim, "Master!" Zhang Ling glared at the two of them. "Are you going to disobey your master's orders?" Although Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were outstanding in this formation, their cultivation quotients had all been taught by Zhang Ling. Therefore they respected and feared Zhang Ling. Although they couldn't bear to do it, they didn't dare to say anything. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other, then lowered their heads and said, "Yes, master." Zhang Ling snorted angrily. After glaring at Ziyuan, she left angrily. As soon as they came out of the cave, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao also flew out. The two of them turned their heads and helplessly looked at Ziyuan, whose figure was faintly discernible in the cave. They sighed in their hearts and silently recited the incantation. Suddenly there was a rumbling sound from the cliff, and the surrounding rocks surged like a wave toward the entrance of the cave. In a short while the entrance was tightly sealed, leaving no trace. The original entrance of the cave was covered with layers of rocks and dense bushes. No one could see that a beautiful fairy was sealed inside. Chapter 943. Ruan Hongling rushed to Mount Tianlong with the sun and moon flowing elixir. As she flew, she wiped away her tears, and the memories in the depths of her mind kept flashing in her mind. She clearly remembered that she and Shiji Ziyuan had chased Su Chan to the balcony of Li Yundong's house. The two of them had lost the clue and returned without success. But what they didn't know at that time was that this was the beginning of a touching love and the beginning of the entanglement of Ziyuan's fate. Especially when she had been beaten by Li Yundong and fled in a sorry state. When she returned to Mount Longhu and asked Shiji Ziyuan to go down the mountain, the psalm left by Wang Yuanshan had come true. Ruan Hongling knew about this psalm. At first she didn't think much of it, but as time went on and Zi Yuan and Li Yundong became more and more entangled, she had become deeply convinced of this psalm. Even she didn't know when she had begun to recognize and accept Li Yundong. In her opinion, Li Yundong and Zi Yuan should be a match made in heaven. When the two of them were together they would be an immortal couple, the most perfect combination. However, the longer Ruan Hongling spent with Su Chan, the more she liked and sympathized with her. She was deeply moved by the sincere feelings between Li Yundong and Su Chan, but she also felt that it was not worth it for her Shiji. Especially now, sacrificing herself to help the two of them. This was simply the stupidest behavior in the world. Ruan Hongling didn't dare to look back in the direction of Mount Longhu. She was afraid that if she looked back she wouldn't be able to help going back to save her Shiji. She knew that Zi Yuan was trapped in the Sanju formation and would definitely be in danger. It was very likely that when she said goodbye to her in the cave, it would be the last time she would ever see her again. Shiji, why are you so stupid? You didn't even know what kind of elixir it was before you stole it. You didn't even care about your own life and the safety of the sect. Ruan Hongling's eyes were filled with tears, and her heart was bleeding. In her mind, there was a painful figure shouting loudly, "Why don't you think about yourself? Why can you be so selfless? Don't you know that true love is selfish?" Ruan Hongling shed tears all the way. Along the way she had to be on guard against anyone who would harm her. Even she didn't know when she had entered the ground of Mount Tianlong in Dongwu City. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, 3 days and 3 nights had passed. After a spring rain at night, the sky was turning white at this time. In the distant sky, there was a faint trace of warm golden sunlight. This warm light flowed and nurtured in the sky. It seemed to continue a force as if a red sun would erupt in the next second. Ruan Hongling looked at the cave in the stone room of the Fox Zen School and saw 2 figures standing at the entrance of the cave. One of them was Li Yundong. At this time, Li Yundong was standing motionless at the entrance of the stone cave, his face facing the east. His eyes were closed and his expression was calm and peaceful. The morning sun shone on his face, making it seem as if it was plated with a thin layer of golden gauze. It made his skin look crystal clear and even more delicate than when he was alive. There was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, as if he would wake up in the next second and once again laugh and play with the people around him. There was another person next to Li Yundong. It was Su Chan. At this time, Su Chan was holding a clean hot towel in her hand. She carefully washed Li Yundong's face and then wiped his exposed skin. Her movements were slow and gentle, like a gentle and careful wife, for fear that if she used a little more strength, she would hurt her husband. After Su Chan finished wiping Li Yundong's body, she stood by and looked at Li Yundong in a daze. Her eyes did not blink as if she was a clay figurine in meditation. There was no sadness on the little girl's face. On the contrary, her face was full of happiness and satisfaction. Perhaps in the little girl's eyes, only at this time did Li Yundong completely belong to her. Only at this time did he have time to accompany her alone, until the end of time, 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 until the end of time. Seeing this, Ruan Hongling's heart ached again. She knew that even if Li Yundong could not wake up again, Su Chan still had a thought and hope. But what about her Shiji? What did she have? Ruan Hongling suppressed the anger in her heart. She quickly climbed up the mountainside and came to Su Chan's side shouting, "Su Chan, Su Chan." But no matter how she shouted, Su Chan never turned her head. She just stared at Li Yundong as if she could not hear or see anything around her. Ruan Hongling shouted a few times. Just as she was about to go forward, she heard a voice not far away. "Stop shouting. She can't hear you. Don't get close to her." Now Su Chan's divine sense has almost been completely sealed. She can only see and hear Li Yundong's voice. Ruan Hongling turned her head and saw a cold figure slowly walking out of the depths of the cave. It was Zhou Qin. After not seeing her for a few days, Zhou Qin's whole body was covered with a layer of gloomy aura, as if she was about to transform into a terrible god of slaughter. As long as the last glimmer of hope in the depths of her heart was extinguished, she would immediately transform into Tsing Lam and drag the whole world into the abyss of hell to be buried with Li Yundong. Zhou Qin's face was as cold as frost, and there seemed to be a cyan fire dancing in her eyes. Her eyes were piercingly cold. Only when her eyes fell on Li Yundong did her bone-chilling gaze reveal a slight warmth. Under her gaze, Ruan Hongling suddenly felt as if she was in the ice river of hell, and she couldn't help shivering. After Zhou Qin finished speaking, she glanced at Ruan Hongling faintly and said, "It's already the 3rd day. Su Chan hasn't eaten, drank, slept, or left. What do you want from her? Where's Ziyuan? Has she found a way? At this time Ruan Hongling opened her palm, revealing a pill spinning in her palm. Zhou Qin looked at it and saw that the pill was red, emitting a soft light. Her eyes suddenly widened and she asked in surprise, "What is this?" Ruan Hongling suddenly thought of her Shiji, whose life and death were unknown. She held back the tears that were about to burst out of her eyes and said, "This is the elixir that Shiji asked me to bring back. It should be able to save Li Yundong." Zhou Qin was ecstatic. She rushed to Ruan Hongling like a gust of wind, snatched the elixir from her hand, held it in her hand against the sun, and looked at it carefully. Zhou Qin said in a trembling voice, "What kind of elixir is this? Can it save master?" Ruan Hongling smiled sadly and said, "I don't know. If you don't believe me, then give the elixir back to me. I'll take it." Before she could finish her sentence, she saw Zhou Qin suddenly retract her hand and quickly rush toward Li Yundong. Zhou Qin was now almost desperate. She quickly stuffed the elixir into Li Yundong's mouth with the idea of making a desperate attempt. As soon as the elixir entered Li Yundong's mouth, it immediately melted and turned into liquid, flowing down the corner of his mouth. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, saw this. She picked up the handkerchief in her hand and gently wiped the corner of Li Yundong's mouth. Then she still looked at Li Yundong with gentle and satisfied eyes, as if she hadn't seen Zhou Qin's actions at all. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong nervously, but after staring at him for a long time, she didn't see any reaction from him. The hope in her eyes became fainter and fainter, and the original ecstasy on her face froze little by little, replaced by deep disappointment. But she didn't notice that under Li Yundong's feet strands of extremely fine black hair were wriggling rapidly, spreading out at an astonishing speed. After a long time, Zhou Qin couldn't help but let out a long sigh when she saw that there was no change in Li Yundong's body. The eyes in her eyes became colder than before. She didn't look at Ruan Hongling anymore, turned around and slowly walked into the stone cave. But just as she took a few steps, she suddenly heard Su Chan exclaim, "Yundong, Yundong, he's awake, he's awake." Zhou Qin was shocked. She immediately turned around and rushed to Li Yundong's side. Ruan Hongling also widened her eyes and looked at Li Yundong. The two of them saw that Li Yundong's expression was the same as before, and they couldn't help but be very disappointed. Zhou Qin couldn't help but ask, "Su Chan, how did you know that master had woken up?" At this time Su Chan seemed to have come to her senses a little. She could recognize Zhou Qin and Ruan Hongling. She stared at Li Yundong and said in a daze, "I saw it. I just saw his eyelashes twitch." Zhou Qin and Ruan Hongling were skeptical. They just stared at Li Yundong without blinking. They could only see the golden crow rising, crossing the sky and then landing on the other side. After the sky was replaced by a bright jade rabbit, they gave up. Only Su Chan was still looking at Li Yundong with infatuation. She muttered, "I saw it, I did see it." Zhou Qin closed her eyes in pain and didn't dare to look anymore. Ruan Hongling also stood there in a daze. She didn't know why Li Yundong still couldn't wake up, nor did she know that if this elixir couldn't save Li Yundong, then what was the point of everything Ziyuan had done? At this time Su Chan turned her head, smiled at them and said, "You don't have to worry. Yundong will definitely wake up again. He will definitely wake up again. I'm going to take him home. When he gets home he will definitely wake up." Zhou Qin and Ruan Hongling heard Su Chan's voice as if she was talking in her sleep, and they couldn't help feeling very sad. In their opinion, Su Chan's deep love had made her lose her mind, so she had said these words. Zhou Qin bit her lip and finally turned to enter the stone cave. After entering the stone cave, she sat down cross-legged in the stone room. Her eyes flashed, crazy and ferocious. At this time she once again made up her mind. She wanted to improve her cultivation and spiritual energy as quickly as possible, become the strongest cultivator in the world as quickly as possible, and then let all the cultivators in the world who had forced her master be buried with her. Ruan Hongling stood there in a daze. She stared blankly at Zhou Qin's figure disappearing into the dark and deep stone cave. But when she turned her face again, she saw that Su Chan had already flown up with Li Yundong in the direction of Tianan City. After a while they turned into a blue light and disappeared. For a moment, only Ruan Hongling was left standing alone at the entrance of the cave of Mount Tianlong. She looked around and saw that the night was dark and the moon was shining brightly. A gust of wind blew and her figure was sad. She couldn't see her Shiji in front of her, and she couldn't see Li Yundong, who she had been with day and night. In an instant Ruan Hongling felt incomparable fear and despair. She couldn't help but burst into tears. Chapter 944. The little girl took Li Yundong and flew in the direction of their home. When they arrived at Tianan City, it was already noon. After the little girl landed in a remote place, she carried Li Yundong on her back as she walked. She seemed to be muttering to herself, but also seemed to be whispering to Li Yundong. Su Chan said in a daze, "Yundong, open your eyes and look. We're back. In the past, I was the one who took you flying. Later, when you became stronger and more powerful, you took me flying. But now, I'm the one who took you flying again." Although the little girl was not short, she looked extremely delicate and weak with Li Yundong on her back. Especially with her amazing beauty, she attracted many people's attention as she walked on the road. Su Chan ignored them along the way and just walked by herself. She walked aimlessly on the streets of Tianan City with Li Yundong on her back. After walking for an unknown period of time, she suddenly found that she had come to the place where she had met and fallen in love with Li Yundong. It was also the rented house that she and Li Yundong had been kicked out of. The little girl raised her head and looked at the small house that had witnessed so many laughter and tears. Looking at the kitchen that had been blown up and repaired, she couldn't help but have tears in her eyes. Su Chan turned her head, wiped away her tears and said to Li Yundong, "Yundong, look, where are we? Don't you want to open your eyes and take a look?" Li Yundong quietly lay on Su Chan's shoulder with his eyes closed, as if he was sleeping soundly. However, Su Chan seemed to have heard his thoughts. She said with a smile, "You don't want to? Then I'll tell you and you'll listen, okay?" With that, the little girl climbed upstairs with Li Yundong on her back. She came to the door of the room where she and Li Yundong used to live and knocked gently. After a while, she heard footsteps coming from inside and a girl opened the door. This girl was none other than the first batch of Tianan University students who had worked in the Desanxian. Naturally, she had seen Li Yundong and Su Chan before, so when she suddenly saw them, she was shocked and stood at the door at a loss. She didn't know whether to call Li Yundong boss, Su Chan lady boss, or something else. Su Chan smiled at the girl and said, "I'm sorry to disturb you. I used to live here with Yundong. I want to take him to see this place again. Is that okay?" The girl seemed a little timid and didn't dare to make a sound. However, the other girl who heard the commotion in the room and came out to take a look reacted very quickly. She quickly said, all right. Please do as you wish." As he spoke, he pulled his companion to the side and shouted in a low voice, "Are you stupid? Even the boss and the lady boss were in a daze? Not to mention coming in to take a look, even if he wanted to take a fancy to this house, it would only take one sentence. What a blockhead. What do you think Li Yundong and his girlfriend are doing here?" the girl said in a low voice. "Besides, I didn't know that they used to live here." The other girl rolled her eyes at her and said, "Why do you care? Rich people are happy. Oh, so the boss used to live here? Well, in the future I will have something to show off to others. They will envy me to death. Do you want to see Li Yundong's former residence? Okay, pay." The girl couldn't help laughing and scolding in a low voice, "You only care about money. You really stink of money." The two of them were whispering, but Su Chan and Li Yundong were sitting quietly in the living room. She whispered in Li Yundong's ear everything that had happened here, as if she wanted to wake Li Yundong up through these things. At first, the two girls were still whispering to each other, but gradually they pricked up their ears and listened to Su Chan whispering about her past with Li Yundong. The more they listened, the more moved they became. When they heard that Li Yundong and Su Chan had been kicked out of the house and lived on the streets, relying on each other for survival, the two girls couldn't help but burst into tears. For a moment they forgot about the gossips. After Su Chan told Li Yundong all these things in detail, she saw that he was still sitting next to her calmly with his eyes closed, motionless. She said, "Yundong, you haven't heard enough, have you? Then I'll take you to other places, okay?" After saying that, she carried Li Yundong out of the door again. She didn't say goodbye to the two girls and just went on her own. The two girls seemed to be enchanted. They followed Su Chan in their pajamas and slippers and went out the door. Not long after, Su Chan took Li Yundong to a small hotel. It was the small hotel where Li Yundong and she had stayed for a night. The two of them stayed for a while, then turned around and went to the community where they had met Ruan Hongling. She walked with Li Yundong on her back, talking all the way, and the two girls followed her in a daze. As they walked, they wiped their tears. Su Chan carried Li Yundong on her back and broke into the places where they had lived and stayed before. Although it was rude, her beauty was amazing, and there was a heartbreaking sadness hidden between her brows at this time, so no one cared about her. On the contrary, after hearing Su Chan's whispered story, although some people didn't understand what had happened, they just quietly looked at Su Chan and Li Yundong, who was like a vegetable, and felt that there was a kind of soul-stirring power in these two people. which made their eyes sting and they couldn't help but want to cry with them. Along the way, the little girl was slowly followed by a lot of people. These people seemed to be under some kind of witchcraft, and they all followed her and Li Yundong in a daze. When the little girl talked about the funny parts of the two of them, they laughed together, but when she talked about sad tears, they all burst into tears, which stunned the passers-by. They didn't know how long they had been like this. When they arrived at a spacious road, a rather luxurious sports car suddenly stopped beside them. A fashionably dressed girl wearing big sunglasses on her face opened her cherry mouth and looked at Su Chan and Li Yundong with a puzzled expression. She wanted to go over and greet them, but she had some misgivings. She could only pull a girl behind them and ask, "What happened here? Why are you following Li Yundong and Su Chan?" The girl wiped her tears and told her what she had seen and heard before, but she didn't expect that the girl, who looked extremely fashionable, would also cry. Especially at the moment when she pushed away her sunglasses and wiped her tears, the girl suddenly found that the beauty in front of her was very similar to the big star Lu Feier. Just as she was about to ask more questions, she saw Su Chan carrying Li Yundong on her back and heading somewhere else. She hesitated for a moment, then turned around and continued to follow the crowd, leaving Lu Feier's matter behind. Lu Feier didn't expect that after she returned to China, she wouldn't be able to contact Chao Kefi several times. She had to drive to find Chao Kefi by herself, but she didn't expect to meet Su Chan and Li Yundong on the side of the road. She stood by the side of the road and hesitated for a moment. In the end, she gritted her teeth, turned off the car's engine and quietly followed the crowd. Although half of Lu Feier's face was covered by sunglasses, half of her round and smooth face could still be seen. It was obvious that she was an extremely stunning beauty. In addition, she was dressed like a star. In the past, wherever she went, she would be the focus of attention. But at this time she was following behind the crowd, but everyone's eyes were fixed on Su Chan and Li Yundong. No one noticed that there was an idle star beside them. The group followed Su Chan and Li Yundong to the amusement park in Tianan City. Su Chan, who was in the lead, walked inside with Li Yundong on her back. The guard at the door saw a large group of people walking in noisily. He didn't even buy a ticket and quickly stopped them from entering. At this time, Lu Feier quickly rushed to buy a ticket, and the guard let them in. Su Chan carried Li Yundong to the bottom of the space shuttle. She quietly waited for everyone to get off before she took Li Yundong to sit on it. At this time she didn't say anything. She just sat quietly, tilted her head and looked at Li Yundong, who was sitting quietly with her, like a stone statue in meditation. It was already 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sky was covered with clouds and the rays of the sun shone on the ground through the clouds. It was as if Su Chan and Li Yundong were covered with a layer of colorful gauze, which was very beautiful. The two of them didn't say a word, but their lingering gazes said thousands of words. At this time the people who followed them all held their breath. No one dared to speak loudly. Gradually the surroundings became extremely quiet. Many people stood to the side quietly watching the couple. They didn't know how long it had been like this. Some people felt that time was as short as a second, but others felt that time was as long as a lifetime. Gradually, the sky darkened, and the people who had been standing quietly by the side began to slowly leave. Lu Feier persisted until the sun finally disappeared in the sky. She sighed secretly and turned to leave. In the end, she still didn't ask Su Chan and Li Yundong about Chao Kefi's whereabouts. After everyone left one by one, Su Chan and Li Yundong's figures were gradually covered by the night. The little girl sat on the chair and looked at Li Yundong in a daze. She reached out and wanted to touch Li Yundong's face, but she shrank it back timidly. She said softly, "Yundong, I will wait for you here. No matter when you wake up, I will wait for you, just like my master waited for Wang Yuanshan." As the little girl spoke, 2 lines of tears slowly flowed down her face. She flipped her hands and pinched her fingers, preparing to seal both herself and Li Yundong like Ao Wushuang had done. She knew that only in this way could Li Yundong's body not rot, and only in this way could she stay with Li Yundong forever until the end of the world. But just as Su Chan was about to do something, the wind and clouds between heaven and earth began to move. In the night, thick clouds slowly drifted over from the far east, and an invisible force surged toward Su Chan from all directions. Tiny golden spots of light quickly drilled into Li Yundong's body. Su Chan didn't notice anything. Just as she was about to recite the incantation, she suddenly heard a very familiar and gentle voice next to her. "If you turn us all into stone, what if someone carves words on our bodies? What will we do? What if we grow grass and worms on our bodies?" Su Chan's body trembled. She turned her face in disbelief. The expression on her face seemed to be about to laugh or cry. She opened her eyes wide and stared at the man beside her, who was looking at her with a smile on his face. If it wasn't Li Yundong, then who was it? Chapter 945. Su Chan stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. She couldn't believe that the man she had been thinking about day and night had really come back. Was it God's blessing, or had a miracle really happened? Su Chan didn't know, and she didn't have time to think about it. At this time she only felt that her heart was about to explode with joy, and every pore on her body was trembling with ecstasy. Her smile was like a flower, but the tears in her eyes couldn't stop flowing. Su Chan wiped away her tears and reached out to touch Li Yundong's cheek. She said in a trembling voice, "Yundong, is it really you? Did she really see you again?" Li Yundong looked at the little girl lovingly, reached out, held Su Chan's soft hand and said softly, "Silly, it's me. You're not mistaken." Su Chan pouted and finally burst into tears. She threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and cried loudly, "I knew you wouldn't leave me alone. It's very pitiful for you to be alone." He gently patted Su Chan's back with a gentle smile on his face. He carefully wiped away the crystal tears on Su Chan's cheeks, as if the person in front of him was a fragile porcelain doll, and if he used a little more strength, the porcelain doll would shatter. Li Yundong said with a smile, "Don't be silly. I've already said that no matter what you become, I won't abandon you, right? Am I a man of my word?" How could Su Chan still say anything? At this time she was already crying and laughing, and she could only nod vigorously. At this time, Li Yundong looked around and found that he was actually in the amusement park of Tianan City. He couldn't help but be stunned and asked curiously, "Why am I here? What happened after that?" Su Chan wiped her tears and told her what had happened after Li Yundong's death. However, she had been in a state of completely sealing off her divine sense for a period of time. She didn't even know that Zi Yuan had stolen the elixir for Li Yundong and that Ruan Hongling had fed Li Yundong the elixir. It was only when she saw Li Yundong's eyelids move slightly that she suddenly woke up from the state of sealing off her divine sense. Li Jiandong quietly listened to Su Chan talk about what had happened after his death. After hearing it, he couldn't help but say, "Although the mystical silver fox is a devil, she is indeed a strange woman who keeps her promise. She has the courage to challenge the gods and Buddhas of heaven with her own strength. She is magnificent." Su Chan looked at Li Yunyang with admiration and said softly, "But I think that you stepped forward bravely and scattered the gods and Buddhas with your own strength. That's the real heroic feat." Li Yundong chuckled and poked the tip of Su Chan's nose with his finger. "No matter how great a hero is, he won't be able to overcome the charms of a beauty like you." Su Chan smiled foolishly. She snuggled up in Li Yundong's arms sweetly and happily, feeling his strong heartbeat and warmth. She said softly, "I really can't believe you're back." As she said this, she raised her head and looked at Li Yundong. "Yundong, why did you wake up at this time?" Li Yundong thought for a while and said, "I don't know. I smashed my yang spirit with one palm. Although I buried the seed of the true method in your body before, so it's not surprising that my broken yang spirit clone can be reunited. My palm also damaged my internal organs and the upper dantian of my brain. If the interior of the body furnace is damaged, it's reasonable to say that it's impossible to resurrect unless..." As he spoke, Li Yundong suddenly seemed to think of something, but it was vague and he couldn't grasp it. He couldn't help asking, "By the way, where's Zi Yuan? What about Zhou Qin? What about the others?" Su Chan exclaimed and said, "They should still be on Mount Tianlong in Dongwu City, right? Yundong, let's go and tell them the good news. They must be very sad." Li Yundong smiled and nodded at her. The two of them quickly flew towards Tianan City hand in hand. On the other side, after Su Chan and Li Yundong flew away, Ruan Hongling cried alone in the same place for a while. She finally stopped crying, only to see that Lin Miao was looking at her with tears in her eyes. Lin Miao held back her tears and said, "Don't cry. In the future you still have to walk the path alone." However, Ruan Hongling cried even harder. She didn't appreciate Lin Miao's kindness at all. She turned her head and shouted at her, "What do you know? You don't know anything." After that, her figure flashed and disappeared in an instant. Ruan Hongling cried as she flew. Even she didn't know where she was going. After losing Shiji Zi Yuan, she suddenly felt that the world had darkened in an instant. She didn't know how she was going to face this world and how she was going to survive. While Ruan Hongling was feeling helpless, she unconsciously found that she had flown to the ground of Mount Longhu. She looked down and saw the winding Mount Longhu lying on the divine land under her feet. It was majestic and majestic. She stood in the air for a while, then suddenly gritted her teeth and landed on Mount Longhu. Ruan Hongling carefully hid her figure along the way. She bypassed the main gate of the main peak of Mount Longhu and came to a place not far from the back of the mountain. She looked up at the place where the Sanju formation had been, only to see that the cliff was overgrown with bushes and rocks. There was no sign of the formation at all. She couldn't help but be shocked. She became more and more nervous and flustered, and her imagination ran wild. Ruan Hongling was about to fly out when she suddenly heard a rustling sound next to her. She was immediately shocked and shrank back, hiding in the bushes, holding her breath and looking calmly. She saw a beautiful little Taoist nun walking slowly on the mountain path. This little Taoist nun was as beautiful as the moon and as beautiful as a flower. It was Zhang Lufang. Zhang Lufang had been punished to patrol the mountain because of her previous mistakes. At this time she was patrolling around the mountain with one of her Shixiang, but unexpectedly her Shixiang had to go to the toilet halfway, so she had to leave first with a look of disgust. But Zhang Lufang didn't expect that under the eyes of the main peak of Mount Longhu, she would meet Ruan Hongling, who had broken into the Sanju formation and quietly returned after escaping. Zhang Lufang only felt a flash of a figure next to her and a strong wind. She subconsciously leaned to one side, only to see a red light flash in front of her. A tassel-like red handkerchief stood horizontally in front of her. The edge of the handkerchief was like a blade, and it was placed on her neck, making her hair stand on end. Zhang Lufang was so scared that she was about to scream, but she heard Ruan Hongling's voice coming from behind her. "Tell me, where's my Shiji Ziyuan? What did you do to her?" Only then did Zhang Lufang realize that the person behind her was Ruan Hongling. Although her cultivation was higher than Ruan Hongling's, it wasn't much higher. In particular, Ruan Hongling had a powerful magical weapon in her hand that was not inferior to the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk. In addition, it was a sneak attack, so she was hit without any suspense and was forced to fight back by Ruan Hongling. After Zhang Lufang recognized the person, she calmed down a little and said in surprise, "Ruan Hongling? Why are you back again? Didn't you say that you had run away? Where is the sun and moon flowing elixir?" Ruan Hongling gritted her teeth and said murderously, "Don't talk nonsense. Where is my Shiji? What did you do to her? Is she dead or alive now?" Ruan Hongling's murderous intent rose in her heart. As long as Zhang Lufang said the news of Ziyuan's death, she would immediately kill Zhang Lufang in front of her. Fortunately, Zhang Lufang pointed at the cliff of the main peak with a pale face and said quickly, "Jinren Ziyuan is sealed in the Sanju formation. But I don't know whether she's dead or alive now." Ruan Hongling turned her head to look, and her heart was filled with grief and anger. The killing intent in her eyes couldn't help but grow stronger. When Zhang Lufang saw this, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She quickly said, "Don't worry. Although Jinren Ziyuan is trapped in the formation, her spiritual power is profound. I think she should be fine for a while. Why don't we find someone else and see if we can rescue her?" Ruan Hongling's body shook slightly, and the murderous intent in her eyes suddenly dissipated a lot. She looked at Zhang Lufang doubtfully and asked, "Are you willing to rescue my Shiji?" As she said this, her eyes suddenly became fierce again. "You're not lying to me, are you? Are you trying to lure me into a trap?" Zhang Lufang quickly waved her hand and said, No. I've always admired Jinren Ziyuan very much. How can a great master and beauty like her be locked up in such a formation for the rest of her life?" Ruan Hongling glared at Zhang Lufang. Although she was still fierce, her murderous aura had gradually subsided. She said coldly, "All right then. I believe you. I'll go look for her now, but you have to come with me." Zhang Lufang complained in her heart, but she had to show a look of joy on her face. She nodded and said, Okay, but you must find a master, otherwise you won't be able to rescue her." Ruan Hongling's face was livid. In an instant she thought of all the masters in the world, but after thinking about it, there was only one person left with a high cultivation quotient who was willing to help her. Zhou Qin. Ruan Hongling turned her wrist, grabbed Zhang Lufang and pulled her into the air. Her powerful magical weapon was still tightly pressed against Zhang Liufang's neck, not relaxing at all. Zhang Lufang sighed in her heart and had no choice but to fly up with Ruan Hongling. She looked down at the ground only to see that her Shixiang, who had gone to the toilet before, had already come over. After looking around for a while and finding that she was gone, he was so angry that he stamped his feet and scolded, "Little Shimmy, you've just been punished, yet you left your post without permission. Do you want to be locked up? Come out quickly or I'll tell Uncle Master." 1, 2, 3. Okay, if you don't come out, I'll tell Uncle Master. This time Zhang Lufang even wanted to die. She looked at Ruan Hongling aggrievedly and wanted to say something, but in the end she swallowed her words. She glanced at the Dharma treasure on her neck and had no choice but to obediently fly out with Ruan Hongling. The two of them flew all the way from Mount Longhu back to Mount Tianlong in Dongwu City. Ruan Hongling was about to fly into the cave to find Zhou Qin when she suddenly saw two people flying over from the opposite side. They were holding hands, looking extremely intimate. This was no small matter. Ruan Hongling was so shocked that she was dumbfounded. She rubbed her eyes with all her might, but when she confirmed it, she immediately looked at the two people who were extremely intimate with each other. Anger rose in her heart, and evil grew in her heart. Wow, my Xixiang is in danger because of you, and you are actually being intimate with someone here. Damn it. Ruan Hongling's eyes turned red. She gritted her teeth and rushed toward Li Yunyang aggressively. Chapter 946. Ruan Hongling rushed to Li Yundong angrily, but just as she was about to speak, Su Chan saw her at a glance and immediately smiled like a flower. She came up to her, took her hand intimately and said with a big smile, "Hongling, look, Yundong is back. He's really back." Su Chan's eyes were like crescent moons when she smiled, and her eyebrows were even more curved. There was an indescribable joy in the corners of her eyes, and her cheeks seemed to be shining with the light of happiness. She was born beautiful and her skin was delicate and pink. At this time, there seemed to be a soft halo flowing on her face. It was really pitiful, let alone an old servant. Ruan Hongling's heart was filled with anger, but seeing Su Chan looking at her with such a happy expression and eyes, how could she do it? For a moment Ruan Hongling didn't know whether she should cry or laugh. Her expression was stiff and she couldn't speak for a long time. Su Chan looked at her in confusion. "Hongling? What happened to you?" Ruan Hongling stared at Su Chan and after a while she looked at Li Yundong. As she stared at him, tears flowed out of her eyes. Li Yundong also looked at her in confusion and asked curiously, "Hongling, what's wrong with you? What happened?" Su Chan was still a little confused. She asked curiously, "Hongling, is there something bothering you? Or are you too happy to see Yundong wake up again?" Ruan Hongling smiled. Her smile was extremely complicated. "Of course I'm happy." After saying that, she wiped away her tears and turned to leave. Su Chan looked at her back blankly and opened her mouth, but she didn't know what to say. Li Yundong looked at her lonely figure and suddenly thought of something. He suddenly said loudly, "Hongling, where is Zi Yuan? Where is she?" Ruan Hongling's body shook. She turned her head and unconsciously, her face was already covered in tears. She said, "Do you still remember Shiji Zi Yuan?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he felt that something was wrong. Just as he was about to step forward and ask carefully, he suddenly heard a cry of ecstasy coming from under his feet. "Master, master!" Li Yundong looked down and saw Lin Miao standing at the entrance of the stone room of the Fox Zen school, waving at him vigorously, jumping, crying and laughing. Lin Miao hadn't expected that she would be able to see Li Yundong come back again. In her ecstasy she couldn't help shouting loudly. However, in her excitement she didn't pay attention to her feet. She stepped on the cliff at the entrance of the cave, tilted her body and fell down. Although she also had a rare constitution created by the elixir, she had not yet started cultivating. Not to mention Shintong magic, she didn't even know the most basic chi flight. This fall immediately scared her to death. Just as she was about to scream, she suddenly felt her body sink, and two strong arms hugged her. Lin Miao turned her head and saw that Li Yundong had already flown back to the entrance of the stone cave with her in his arms. She blushed and looked at Li Yundong speechless. When she finally took a deep breath and wanted to speak, a figure rushed out of the stone cave like a gust of wind and threw herself into Li Yundong's arms. She beat him and burst into tears. It was Zhou Qin. It was Zhou Qin. It was the first time that Lin Miao had seen her, who was usually a little cold, cry like this. For a moment she was a little stunned and couldn't help but step aside. She watched Zhou Qin cry in Li Yundong's arms with some emotion. At first, Li Yundong still opened his hands, not knowing whether he should hold Zhou Qin or not. However, after glancing at Su Chan, he saw that the little girl was smiling sweetly at him, her eyes full of trust and joy. His heart warmed, so he tightened his hands, gently patted Zhou Qin's back and said softly, "Don't cry. I'm back again, aren't I?" Zhou Qin was a woman who was extremely good at controlling her emotions in public and was extremely good at patience. She was like a snow mountain, and all the accumulation was sealed and frozen under the white snow. The more it accumulated, the more it would suddenly burst out at a certain time. Zhou Qin's cry was full of grievance and fear, as if she wanted to vent all the accumulated emotions in her heart. She cried so hard that Su Chan and Lin Miao, who were beside her, were also infected. They cried until their eyes were hazy. Only Yuan Hongling, who was beside them, also had tears in her eyes, but she bit her lip tightly, her eyes full of unwillingness and grievance. Li Yundong gently hugged Zhou Qin and let her cry loudly in his arms. He knew that Zhou Qin must have been extremely depressed and painful in the past few days. He could even imagine that if he really left her behind, she would definitely go crazy and even become another she-devil. After crying for a long time, Zhou Qin gradually calmed down. She gently pushed Li Yundong away with both hands, wiped her tears and then stood aside. She said softly, choking with sobs, "Master, you can't do it again. If there is a next time, no matter what the situation is, I will die with you." As the saying goes, a hero's spirit is short. Li Yundong's spiritual energy was divine and he was a hero, but he couldn't stand the infatuation words of a girl. He sighed and shook his head, not knowing what to say. At this time, Zhang Lufang couldn't help but lean over. Yuan Hongling had rushed toward Li Yundong aggressively, and her personal powerful magical weapon had also flown over with her. Zhang Lufang suddenly lost control, but she forgot to escape for a moment. She just stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. Although she hadn't been able to come to Mount Tianlong to participate in this unprecedented battle, Zhang Lufang had heard countless people talk about how Li Yundong had risked his life to save Su Chan in the end. For this reason, Zhang Lufang had shed many tears and been laughed at by her Shixiang. In Zhang Liufang's mind, Li Yundong had risked his life for Su Chan, which made his image reach a perfect realm. He was even the greatest Casanova since ancient times. However, after Zhang Lufang gave Li Yundong the title of a perfect Casanova, she found out that he was not dead. What the hell is going on? In an instant, Zhang Liufang's mind was full of question marks, and her eyes almost fell out of their sockets. Zhang Lufang couldn't help but stare at Li Yundong and stammered, Li Yundong, aren't you dead? I heard that your palm hit the top of your head, and the cauldron's yang spirit has been destroyed. How can you still come back to life like this? As she said this, Zhang Lufang suddenly came to her senses. She pointed at Li Yundong and stammered, You can't. Li Yundong smiled and said, Can't what? You don't want to say that I'm a ghost, do you? Zhang Lufang stamped her feet and said, Who thinks you're a ghost? Do ghosts have such strong yang qi? Tell me, did you eat the sun and moon flowing elixir and come back to life? That's the most precious treasure of our Jingyi school. You actually ate it. Li Yundong was stunned and asked in confusion, Sun and moon flowing elixir? You mean the sun and moon flowing elixir in the deed of Zhoui comprehension? When did your Jingyi school refine such a divine elixir? As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but say in a low voice, That's right. When I can feel the existence of my consciousness and soul again, it's also because I can feel that my body has once again produced heat in the cauldron. That's why I can come back to life. Could it be, if a cultivator wanted to come back to life, there were two prerequisites. The first was that he had to have a host, a body cauldron that could accommodate the soul of the divine sense. If a damaged or dead body cauldron contained the soul of the strongest divine sense in the world, it would probably die of natural causes not long after. This was because the decay and death of the body was irreversible, and it could not be changed by the power of magic or jinqi. No matter how powerful a cultivator was, it was impossible for him to cultivate his body to the point where it was truly invulnerable and impervious to water and fire, and it was even more impossible for him to cultivate his body to the point where he would never die. But even if there was an intact body cauldron, if their souls and divine senses were scattered in all directions, it would be useless. Li Yundong's yang spirit soul was also an extremely powerful force between heaven and earth. In the past, because of the existence of the Niden in the body cauldron, even if it was scattered into hundreds of millions of clones, it could still be gathered and rebuilt with his Niden as the center. However, once the body was destroyed and the yang spirit was smashed, these yang spirits would lose their focus and could no longer gather together. After a long time, they would slowly scatter and eventually break down and melt in the universe, becoming a drifting force without a master, or being assimilated by more powerful energy. However, because Li Yundong had received Zhang Zhishuan's teaching, he had comprehended the infinite void and the realm of the unity of heaven and man. Therefore he had placed his true method brand on Su Chan early. Such a true method brand was equivalent to a road sign. If his yang spirit soul was smashed one day, as long as the cauldron was still there and the Niden could still gather and operate, his soul and yang spirit would be able to follow his true method brand and find home again according to this road sign. The way home. This was also why when all the gods and Buddhas saw Li Yundong shatter his yang spirit with one palm and destroy his body cauldron, they all believed that he was dead. They turned around and returned to the heaven realm, no longer making things difficult for him and the people around him. Li Yundong knew that if he wanted to be resurrected, his body cauldron would have to be recast and resurrected again. However, it was easy to say, but it was as difficult as ascending to heaven. It was absolutely impossible without earth-shattering events. Thinking of this, Li Yundong thought of Yuan Hongling's performance before. Then he saw that everyone was here except Zi Yuan. His heart suddenly shrank into a ball. Li Yundong's pupils suddenly shrank. He quickly rushed over to Yuan Hongling, grabbed her arm with both hands and shouted, "Where is Zi Yuan? How is she? She stole the sun and moon flowing elixir, didn't she?" Yuan Hongling finally couldn't help it. She burst into tears and shouted hoarsely, "Have you finally found out? Have you finally found out that she is gone? For you she even gave up her life. For you she didn't hesitate to betray the Jingyi school, betray her sect and give up everything." As she spoke, Yuan Hongling bit her lip hard and tears rolled down her face. "Li Yundong, answer me. The relationship between you and Su Chan is true. Isn't Zi Yuan's love for you also true? Do you know how much she sacrificed for you? Do you still remember?" Every word of Yuan Hongling was like a sledgehammer, hitting Li Yundong's soft heart heavily. In an instant his mind was buzzing, and Yuan Hongling's words kept echoing in his mind. "The relationship between you and Su Chan is true. Isn't Zi Yuan's love for you also true?" Li Yundong had been deliberately avoiding this question, but now he was completely forced into a corner. He had the supernatural power of heaven and earth, shocking wisdom and knowledge, and a demeanor that made people admire and worship him. But even a person like him couldn't help but feel like he was on a cliff on a lonely island. He looked around blankly and kept asking himself in his heart, "Yes, what should I do? What am I supposed to do?" Chapter 946. A word awakens a dreamer. Text updates fastest. Chapter 947. Li Yundong stood there in a daze. After a long while, he let out a long sigh and said, "Hongling, I understand what you said, but..." Just as he was at a loss for words, a warm and soft body suddenly snuggled up to him. Li Yundong turned his head and saw that it was Su Chan. Su Chan opened her big bright eyes and said softly, "Yundong, think about how to save Sister Zi Yuan first." Li Yundong was shocked. He looked at Su Chan with gentle eyes and asked softly, "Don't you mind?" Su Chan shook her head and then nodded. She smiled slightly and said, "Sister Zi Yuan has helped us so much. If it weren't for her you wouldn't have been able to survive. No matter what, we should save her, shouldn't we?" Li Yundong felt a little relieved. He let out a long breath, turned to Yuan Hongling and said, "Hongling, don't worry. I will definitely save Zi Yuan." Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, was also afraid that Li Yundong and Su Chan would have a conflict because of this matter. Seeing that Su Chan was so righteous, she was also overjoyed. She rubbed her hands and said, "Master, the Jingyi school has made trouble for us again and again. This time we can settle the score with them." Zhang Liufang's heart sank when she heard this. She was a disciple of the Jingyi school, so she naturally had to speak up for the Jingyi school. She immediately cried out in grievance and said loudly, "Jinren Zhou Qin, your words are really unreasonable. Even if Zi Yuan stole the sun and moon flowing elixir to save people, it is still a felony of theft and apostasy. Moreover, the sun and moon flowing elixir is the most precious treasure of our Jingyi school. Without it, our Jingyi school will have a big problem. Even if we stole it to cure the disease and save people, it is still stealing. No matter what excuse we have to kill people, killing people is killing people and they must be punished. Our Jingyi school didn't make trouble for you, but you want to make trouble for us? What's the reason?" Zhang Lufang was young and aggressive, so she immediately regretted her words. She was afraid that Li Yundong and the others would get angry and kill her, the insider, regardless of their previous friendship. She looked over and saw that Zhou Qin's eyebrows were gradually raised, and her whole body was full of murderous intent. Zhang Lufang was so scared that her heart was beating wildly. She pointed at Zhou Qin and said, Hey, calm down. What do you want to do? Murder? Someone wants to kill me to silence me." Li Yunyang saw Zhang Lufang shouting and jumping up and down. Her delicate voice could almost be heard throughout Mount Tianlong. If it weren't for the fact that there was no one near the mountain at this time, it would have immediately attracted a lot of attention. He said to Zhang Lufang with a wry smile, "Stop shouting. Who said I was going to kill you?" Zhang Lufang saw that Li Yundong wanted to protect her, so she quickly hid behind him and said loudly, "Li Yundong, you can't be so heartless. I've helped you a lot. You can't hurt me. Besides, do you really have the heart to lay your hands on an innocent, cute, lively and beautiful little girl like me?" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Are you doing a monologue? Did I say I was going to kill you?" Zhang Lufang poked her head out from behind Li Yundong and glared at Zhou Qin rudely. She then made a face at her and said, She just looked at me fiercely and wanted to kill me. Li Yundong, she's your disciple. You have to control her." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at Zhou Qin. Zhou Qin straightened her neck and said, "No matter what, let Jingyi School release her as soon as possible. If they don't, Although Zhang Lufang admired Li Yundong very much, she was after all an inner disciple of Jingyi School. At this time the relationship between them was reflected. She shouted angrily, "Jinren Zhou, do you really think that our Jingyi School is easy to bully?" Zhou Qin snorted and glanced at her contemptuously, not saying anything. When Li Yundong saw that the two of them immediately quarreled because of a disagreement, he suddenly felt a little headache. He said, "Okay, stop arguing. Zhou Qin, I'll deal with this matter. What Zhang Lufang said makes sense. Although Ziyuan did it to save me, no matter what, she did violate the rules of Jingyi School. If we go to their door, not only will we be in the wrong, but it will also cause turmoil in the Chinese cultivation world, making our loved ones suffer and our enemies happy." Hearing Li Yundong's words, Zhou Qin said helplessly, "Master, if we don't do this, how can we save Ziyuan? Do we have to go to their door and beg them to let her go? Master, what is your identity and status now? How can you do such a thing? If it doesn't work, I'll go and beg them to let her go, okay? You can't go." At this time Su Chan also said, "Yundong, I'll go too. I believe that our sincerity can move the leader of Jingyi School. Last time I saw Zhang Tianshi, he didn't seem to be an unreasonable person." Li Yundong sighed, shook his head and said, "You don't know how difficult it is to be a leader if you don't want to be one. As a sect leader, the most important thing is to keep your word. If you make such a big mistake and someone comes to ask for leniency, you raise the board high, then put it down lightly and let it go. Then who would take the sect rules seriously in the future?" These words made Su Chan and Zhou Qin look at each other. Zhang Lufang nodded vigorously like a chick pecking at rice. She had completely forgotten that Zhang Ling had tried every means possible to get Zhang Tianhe and herself off the hook. Zhou Qin said with a troubled expression, "Master, neither soft nor hard methods work. What should we do?" Li Yundong pondered for a while, then suddenly raised his head and said with a smile, "I have a way." Su Chan and the others looked at Li Yundong in confusion, wanting to know what he could do. However, Li Yundong just smiled and didn't say anything. He waved to Zhou Qin and said, "Zhou Qin, you have to help me with this matter. Come here, I'll tell you." Zhou Qin moved closer in confusion and leaned over to listen. Zhang Lufang, who was standing to one side, rolled her eyes and stretched her head to look over, but Zhou Qin glared at her and shouted, "What are you doing? Do you want to tell them?" Zhang Lufang was startled and subconsciously shrank back, but soon she puffed out her chest and said, "Not to be outdone, I'm in your hands. How can I tell them? How can I tell them? Tell me, tell me." Zhou Qin was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She was about to speak, but Li Yundong pulled her arm and said with a smile, "That's enough. You're not young anymore. How can you argue with a child?" Zhou Qin had to give up and glared at Zhang Lufang with hatred. However, Zhang Lufang was proud, like a general who had won a battle. She raised her chin to the sky, but her ears were always pricked up, listening to what Li Yundong and Zhou Qin were saying. After Li Yundong whispered something in Zhou Qin's ear, Zhou Qin was a little confused at first, but the more she listened, the bigger her eyes became. After listening, she was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. After a long time, she turned her head and stammered, "Master, this doesn't seem to be good, does it? It's too exaggerated, isn't it?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Jingyi School is an important Taoist sect in the Chinese cultivation world, and Celestial Master Zhang is also one of the best masters in the Chinese cultivation world. If we have a head-on conflict with Jingyi School, it will be a fight between two tigers and one of them will be injured. Now is the end of Dharma in the cultivation world. If we fight among ourselves, we will really destroy ourselves. I don't want to see such a situation. Therefore, at present, the best way to avoid serious conflicts between the two sides is this." Zhou Qin's expression was strange. She looked at Li Yundong strangely, as if she hadn't expected that the great master in front of her, who could force all the gods and Buddhas to scatter with one palm, would come up with such an unprecedented bad idea. Although Su Chan, Lin Miao, Ruan Hongling and Zhang Lufang each had their own thoughts, they couldn't help but be curious when they saw Zhou Qin's reaction at this time. They all asked, "What is it? Tell us quickly, let's hear it." At this time, Zhou Qin couldn't help but smile slightly and say, "Don't ask me, ask Master." She turned her face and said to Li Yundong, "Master, I'll go down the mountain first to prepare something." Li Yundong smiled and nodded at her. "Go ahead. Take Lin Miao with you. She can also help." Lin Miao was overjoyed. She quickly stepped forward and took Zhou Qin's arm, eagerly asking what Li Yundong had said to her. Zhou Qin held back her laughter and told Lin Miao. Lin Miao's expression also became extremely strange, and she looked at Li Yundong strangely. Although Ruan Hongling had been full of unhappiness before, after saying these words she had vented a lot of her emotions. In addition, she had a good relationship with Lin Miao and Zhou Qin. At this time she was curious and couldn't care less. Seeing the two of them leave, she couldn't help but chase after them. "Hey, wait for me, I'll go with you." After chasing after them, she immediately asked, her voice coming from afar, "Hey, what the hell is going on? Tell me. If you don't tell me, we'll break off our relationship." If Su Chan had been in the past, she would have been so anxious and curious that she would have thrown herself into Li Yundong's arms and acted like a spoiled child. She would not give up until she got to the bottom of the matter. However, after she and Li Yundong had parted ways, she had matured a lot in an instant. Many things in the past had suddenly become indifferent to her. She only felt that as long as she could be with Li Yundong and they loved each other, she didn't care about anything else. Although Su Chan was curious, she just smiled and watched Zhou Qin and Lin Miao whisper to each other as they left. She didn't ask Li Yundong any further. Li Yundong looked at her curiously and couldn't help asking, "Chaner, don't you want to know how I will deal with the Jingyi school?" Su Chan smiled softly, her smile full of happiness and satisfaction. She said, "If you want to tell me, you will take the initiative to tell me. If you don't say it, it's useless for me to ask, right?" Hearing this, Li Yundong sighed with emotion. After all the hardships and twists and turns, the naughty and naive little girl had finally matured and grown up. Her immaturity had gradually faded away, replaced by the flashy precipitation and calmness of someone who had experienced life and death, as well as the ups and downs. Li Yundong pinched the little girl's nose dotingly and said with a smile, "Well, my little girl has finally grown up." Su Chan and Li Yundong looked at each other and smiled sweetly. The two of them were happy and sweet as if there was no one else around. Only Zhang Lufang, who was next to them, was the most anxious. She was lively and impatient. She couldn't hide her words, nor could she hold back. She wanted to catch up with them, but she couldn't bring herself to do so. She didn't know how to tell Li Yundong even if she stayed. She was so anxious that she scratched her ears and cheeks, wishing she could drill into Li Yundong's heart and dig out this matter to make it clear. Zhang Lufang watched Li Yundong and Su Chan being intimate with each other as if there was no one else around. Her pretty little face was as black as the bottom of a pot. She shouted crazily in her heart, "What the hell is this? You can't torture people like this." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.